Chapter 561. Nanshi had a stomachache after he finished eating the noodles. Wei Wei Bai remained calm. The food she cooked was indeed disgusting. After all, for such a perfect person like her, having a small flaw would make her seem more adorable. Nanshi collapsed and laid down on the sofa. He didn't have time to think about the black material for a while. His mood was not as bad as before. He turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai walking over with a glass of water. He did not know what he was thinking, but he immediately averted his gaze and looked extremely weak. Then, he saw a slender arm reach over, and a fair and delicate finger was placed on his forehead. Fortunately, it's not cold. It's not serious. Take some medicine. When the stomachache was serious, the forehead would be very cold. Nanshi stared at her outstretched hand and could not help but look at her. He realized that she was wearing a simple t-shirt. The collar was a little loose, and her delicate neck and exquisite collarbone were exposed. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked worried. What's wrong? Does it hurt a lot? Nanshi fell silent. He suddenly turned his back to Wei Wei Bai. You can leave. I don't need your sympathy. After saying that, he actually became a little nervous. What was there to be nervous about? He really hated people pointing at him and looking at him sympathetically. After waiting for a while, there was an unusual silence behind him. She really left? Nanshi showed a sneering smile, but his smile didn't have time to bloom. A pair of hands gripped his shoulders and turned him around. Nanshi then saw Wei Wei Bai frowning. There was anger in her eyes as she held the pill and stuffed it directly into his mouth. Nanshi almost choked to death. Wei Wei Bai's hands were nimble. She pinched his chin with one finger and poured a mouthful of water into his mouth with the other hand. Nanshi did not have time to resist and was forced to drink the water and swallow the pill. He coughed. He was so angry that his hair was about to explode. What are you doing? Wei Wei Bai's face was full of anger. Why are you so insensible? Why are you throwing a tantrum when your stomach isn't feeling well? Only a child of a few years old would use self-harm to gain attention. Nanshi's eyes were full of lush flames, and his thick eyelashes were trembling non-stop. Who are you calling a child? Wasn't this saying that he was childish? Wei Wei Bai frowned. Her fair skin was tinged with a hint of crimson. She lowered her eyes sadly. Nanshi, your brother is lying down. You are the only man in the house now, so take good care of yourself. Don't be willful. Nanshi hated being lectured the most. In the past, to become a singer, his family had to lecture him regardless of whether he knew him or not. Now that he was down and out, someone was actually lecturing him. He reached out and pushed her away, looking at her with an icy expression. Who do you think you are? Do you really think you're my sister-in-law? Who are you to control me? Wei Wei Bai staggered and sat on the ground. She sat there in a daze, but she didn't jump up to confront him in anger. Her long black hair was a little messy and draped over her shoulders. Her fair skin had a clean and clear texture. Her eyes were a little scattered, and she looked at him with a hint of sadness and disappointment. Nanshi was flustered by her gaze. He got up and wanted to pull her up, but when he stretched out his hand, he felt that it was too cowardly. He could only hide it and put his hand in his trouser pocket. Even his words were a little incoherent. My family doesn't acknowledge you at all. Why are you always shamelessly sticking to me? Isn't divorce good? The He family can't give you anything, and you still call yourself my sister-in-law. You're too self-righteous. T. Chapter 562. He actually wanted her to get out of the He family's mess. Who wouldn't avoid him when they saw him? Why was she rushing to her death? She was so down and out that she had to be a hostess. Did she think that she was a superwoman? Wei Wei Bai lowered her head in silence. She couldn't refute him. Hinanshi stood there, his tall and thin figure casting a shadow over her. Instead, she looked exceptionally pitiful and lonely. He frowned and didn't know why he felt uncomfortable. You can leave. Don't come back again. He had never liked this sister-in-law. She was just flattering herself. Bai Weiwei finally moved. She got up from the ground with some difficulty, then without saying a word, she picked up her bag. Then, she walked out with light footsteps. Halfway through, she turned back. Hinanshi stared at her back view. When he saw that she suddenly turned back, he turned back awkwardly. I'll leave first then. I know that you're in a bad mood and I'm afraid that you'll do something stupid. Hinanshi sneered. There was only coldness on his stunningly handsome face. Weiwei Bai reached out and put the keys on the table. Then, she said softly, don't put it under the mattress next time. It's easy for people to find it. With that, she walked out and closed the door. The living room was empty. There was only the ticking sound of the clock that was so calm that it was cruel. Hinanshi's upright body slumped. He pursed his thin lips, his handsome eyes drooping. A feeling of loneliness surrounded him. He hated noise, but that didn't mean that he liked a place that was as quiet as a grave. Hinanshi turned to look at the door. He turned back awkwardly and couldn't help but mock, you really think that you're my sister-in-law? I don't care. Besides, she left just like that. It was just a plastic sister-in-law relationship. Outside the door. Weiwei Bai squatted at the door, holding her forehead. Is the temperature high? The system was extremely calm. 38 degrees. Weiwei Bai, why don't you make it 40 degrees? That would be more convincing. The system retorted, do you think you're a stock that can rise as you please? Weiwei Bai, I've been out in the cold all night. I've even finished the outline. The system silently took out the earplugs and stuffed them into its ears. Meanwhile, Weiwei Bai had already started to narrate, my sister-in-law, who has a beautiful face and a good figure, is kind, gentle, and saintly, worried about her poor brother-in-law day and night and couldn't sleep or eat well. She ran over early in the morning to take care of her miserable brother-in-law. In the end, it was too tiring for her and she got a fever in his arms. Under the blazing fire, the two of them, no, not even earplugs could stop the host's shameless words. If this had happened in ancient times, this shameless host would have been stuffed 100 times. When it compared itself to its host every day, it felt that it was especially righteous and awe-inspiring. It could even win the Best Moral Model of the Year award. What else could it do with such a host? The earplugs were also in despair. Weiwei Bai, too bad Hinanshi, that idiot, chased me out, so I had to change my plan. I was so tired that I ended up in front of his house. The system couldn't help but say, isn't this a fucking scam? No matter what, she was still clinging on to Hinanshi. Weiwei Bai smiled sweetly. Yeah. The system, half an hour after Weiwei Bai left, Hinanshi was pacing around the house. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't in the mood to compose or play the piano. He was afraid to watch the news about his house when he watched TV. He didn't like to play games either. Crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here and read at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here and read at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here and read at https://sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 563. He had never felt that staying at home alone was such a sad thing. Hinanshi thought of Wei Wei Bai again, that sorrowful figure leaving. She was a completely different person from those comments. At least she didn't abandon his brother and was still willing to visit him, no matter what her attitude was. She was much better than those so-called good friends who slandered him. Hinanshi didn't expect that he would be so down and out one day. He didn't expect that after he was down and out, the person who came to visit him was actually Wei Wei Bai, whom he had always hated. He shook his head and threw Wei Wei Bai out of his mind. Then he put on a black mask and opened the door in his slippers, planning to go out for a walk. However, when the door opened, a petite figure was curled up at the door. She leaned against the wall, her delicate eyebrows furrowed. Her delicate skin looked fragile and delicate under the light of the corridor lights. This kind of person didn't look old at all. If it wasn't for the heavy makeup, she would be less than 2 years older than him, but she spoke as if she was in her 70s or 80s. Hinanshi looked at her indifferently. His black eyes had a little light, but they were cold and empty. He lifted his foot and walked over, ignoring him. Hinanshi walked into the supermarket, found his favorite soda, and was about to pay the bill. He heard the two cashiers gossiping. Hinanshi takes drugs. I used to be his fan, but now I'm an anti-fan. I can't tolerate taking drugs. Yeah, although the songs are good, I don't want to see him when I think of him hitting people and having sex. This kind of artist with a bad record should be banned. The entertainment industry is full of people like him. Yeah, he should be banned. He listened to the discussion of his two former fans. Hinanshi held the soda. His tall and thin body was unbelievably tense. He almost couldn't control his trembling, whether it was anger or sadness. All kinds of feelings made him sour and bitter. He pinched the soda hard in his hand and suddenly shook it a few times. Then, he gloomily walked to the cashier and threw the money to them. One of them wanted to take the soda from his hand, intending to scan the QR code for change. In the end, Hinanshi forcefully pulled open the tab of the can, and the soda sprayed all over the two women's faces. The two girls screamed at once. Hinanshi threw away the soda can, turned around, and walked away. Walking out of the supermarket, he revealed a happy smile on his successful prank. However, halfway through his smile, he slowly became desolate. Hinanshi walked home again and arrived at the door. However, he found that Wei Wei Bai was still lying there. He didn't want to care about her life or death. But this time, he couldn't step in. After hesitating for a few seconds, Hinanshi bent down and patted her face with a cold expression. Hey, woman, why are you sleeping in front of my house? She had already said that she wanted to leave, but she still refused to leave. Who knew what kind of dark schemes he was harboring in his heart? Hinanshi had been afraid of being slandered recently, so he looked at everyone as a bad person. Wei Wei Bai's face was soft, bouncy, and surprisingly smooth. His fingers stiffened for a moment, and then he realized that something was wrong. Why was her face a little hot? Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes in a daze, as if she had heard his question. She looked up at him blankly, looking pitiful. Hinanshi's fingers stiffened, and then he quickly retracted them, pretending that nothing had happened. Why are you still here? Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, and then slowly lowered her head. Her voice was soft and pitiful. I don't know where to go. After saying this, she closed her eyes again, and her face was red. For the https://www.sashu.com/ for the full text, https://www.sashu.com for the full text, https://www.sashu.com for the full text, https://m. Sashu.com for the full text, comma. Chapter 564. She was confused because of the fever. Her mind was not clear at all. Did she think that he was his brother? Hinanshi did not dare to move, worried that she would react. He was not dongling. Wei Wei Bai's cries were soft, like feathers, brushing past his ears bit by bit. Finally, it came to his eardrums, and it made his whole body itch. She was crying like a kitten that had just been weaned. She muttered softly, "Why does everyone want to break us apart? I've worked so hard. Am I not worthy of being loved?" Hinanshi's body stiffened, not daring to say a word. She continued aggrievedly, "I just want to love you. I'm not dirty." Hinanshi's pupils constricted when he heard this. When they first met, he had called her dirty. Speaking of dirty, he was not that much better. Even if he was splashed with dirty water, in the eyes of outsiders, he had already become an unpardonable scumbag. Compared to Wei Wei Bai, he was even dirtier. The sound of Wei Wei Bai's breathing swept across his neck. This was his sensitive spot. His neck started to redden, and the redness spread to the back of his ears. Hinanshi did not know how long he maintained this position for, afraid that Wei Wei Bai would realize that he was not her brother. Otherwise, the scene would be very awkward. When he finally could not hold on and his body was numb, he relaxed his body and gently pushed Wei Wei Bai away. She was asleep with her eyes closed. She did not recognize him at all. Hinanshi's face was burning. Only then did he react, and anger surged in his heart. "Are you blind? I'm obviously younger and more handsome than my brother. How can you recognize the wrong person?" Just as he finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai's eyelids moved, as if she was about to be woken up by him. Hinanshi suddenly got up and turned to escape. He was worried that Wei Wei Bai would wake up again and recognize him randomly. Hinanshi walked to the balcony anxiously to feel the cold wind. He leaned against the balcony railing, and the cold wind messed up his short hair, revealing his smooth forehead. He did not know what to think, but he took out a box of cigarettes from his pocket. This was bought together with the soda at the supermarket. The soda was used to spray the gossipy woman. The cigarettes were still in his pocket. Hinanshi's picked up a cigarette and stared at it. Because his favorite career was singing. And smoking would ruin his voice. Hinanshi hesitated again and again before stuffing the cigarette into his pocket. He couldn't help but shout, "What a coward!" He wouldn't have the chance to go on stage in the future, so what was there to be afraid of? Should he be more afraid now? Was it more important for him to make a cuckold out of his brother? Although it was an accident, Hinanshi was still brooding. After all, this was his sister-in-law. Hinanshi was stunned when he thought of this. After a long silence, he frowned and said impatiently, "Forget it. Sister-in-law is sister-in-law. After all, she's not a vain and shameless woman. It's okay to admit it." He did it on account of her sincerity towards his brother. That was why he reluctantly admitted her identity. But for some reason, he felt a little depressed. Hinanshi had been in a bad mood recently, so he did not think much about it. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased by 5. Wei Wei Bai, this little bastard with a cheap mouth finally increased favorability. System, little bastard with a cheap mouth? Wei Wei Bai, don't you think this bitter-hearted boy who speaks sarcastically and bitterly has a poisonous mouth? System, bitter-hearted boy, compared to the host, it felt that the male lead's mouth was like a clear stream, not poisonous at all. Chapter 565. Hinanshi was blown away by the cold wind for a long time before the unexpected kiss in his mind faded away. Then he went to sleep with a gloomy face. Wei Wei Bai slept on the sofa while he slept on the bed. He slept for a long time. When he woke up, it was already noon. With a bird's nest hairstyle, he walked out lazily with his long legs. However, he found that the sofa was already empty. There was only a note on the table. Hinanshi was silent for a long time before he walked over and picked up the note to read. There was delicate handwriting on it. I had a fever yesterday and caused you trouble. I'm going to take care of your brother. I have to work tonight. Don't worry about the medical fees. I'll earn your brother's medical fees. Nanshi, listen to my advice. Don't be afraid of temporary difficulties. You're very talented. One day, you'll return to the stage. This was a well-behaved tone. It sounded like a Qing dynasty zombie. Hinanshi crumpled the note into a ball and threw it into the bin. Do you know how much my brother's medical fees are? Poverty has limited your poor imagination. Where are you going to earn so much money? The He family went bankrupt. Assets were frozen. However, it didn't mean that they were so poor that they had to live on the streets. Some assets couldn't be put under the He family's name. Who didn't know that a cunning rabbit had 3 nests? The money under his name was enough for a lifetime if he didn't spend it recklessly. However, he couldn't be a glamorous young master in the future. And that woman, Wei Bai, did she think that he was so poor that he was going to starve to death? Or did she think that the two of them would have to rely on her to earn money in the future? Hinanshi had never been looked down upon like this before. However, this kind of contempt wasn't malicious mockery like the outside world. It was a kind of unfamiliar and sincere concern. This made him lose confidence in his mockery. He didn't expect to fall to this point. It was his sister-in-law, whom everyone hated, who stayed to take care of them. Hinanshi suddenly wanted to call his parents who ran away faster than anyone else. He wanted to ask, was his sister-in-law really that unbearable? She didn't look like a woman who stole jewelry and was vain. Was there a mistake somewhere? Hinanshi leaned against the sofa tiredly as he thought about it. He closed his eyes to rest. Suddenly, he frowned as if he had thought of something. Wait a minute. Wei Bai was talking about work. Wasn't she just a bar hostess? He almost jumped up, his black eyes filled with anger. She's already married, but this woman still has the nerve to do this kind of dirty work. Who knows how many times my brother has been cuckolded by her. Hinanshi casually grabbed a black hooded sweatshirt and put it on. Then, he put on a black mask, put on a set of loose clothes, and ran out in slippers. His entire body seemed to be on fire as he rushed to the bar in an aggressive manner. This time, he was even angrier than before. Even Hinanshi didn't know how bright his eyes were. He was like a little leopard that was about to attack. Wei Bai wore heavy makeup and sat in a corner drinking water. Tongzi, do you think that bear will come? The system said, I saw that he hasn't left yet. Wei Bai said, he should come. After all, if I don't get rid of my hostess identity, it'll be hard for my favorability to increase in the future. The system opened its heaven's eye and scanned again. He's here. He's driving over. Wei Bai suddenly came to life from her 70-80-year-old sluggish appearance. She immediately threw away her coat, revealing her revealing dress. Then, she walked to the table of other guests, picked up a glass of wine and gulped it down. She had always been a professional when it came to acting. Chapter 566. The bar was extremely noisy. Hinanshi walked in aggressively. In the heat wave, everyone twisted their bodies excitedly as if they were on drugs. A few of them were twisted into human braids. They were an eyesore no matter how he looked at them. Hinanshi put his hands in his pockets. His good-looking brows were furrowed deeply. He pursed his lips. His face under the black mask was as dark as a second mask. He turned his head to look around. He didn't know where Wei Bai was. Could it be that she had been taken away? Some hostesses were hostesses, some were prostitutes, and some were kept as mistresses. Although he used to have a smooth life in the entertainment industry, no bad things could find him. However, he also knew some of the messy things that he should know. Wei Wei Bai was already married to his brother. Why didn't she know how to respect herself? No wonder his parents had always wanted to kick her out of the He family. Who would want a hostess as a wife? He Nanshi paced around. He really didn't know where to find Wei Wei Bai. He was also worried that she had really sold herself. He could only thicken his skin and wear a mask. He walked to those old women who looked like brothels to ask around. You mean Wei Wei? Haha, her main job is to be a hostess. You have to open a private room to order wine before you can order her. Hinanshi's short hair was messy. His eyes were exquisite. He stood tall and thin in front of them. Even if they couldn't see his face, his silhouette was still stunning. He looked coldly at the old woman who was speaking. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said word by word, other than being a hostess. The old woman thought that he was here for some special service. She flipped through her book. Other than being a hostess, she doesn't have any other business at the moment. After all, some people don't sell themselves. Now that we're in a legal society, we can't force them, right? Hinanshi didn't know why, but a huge rock in his heart suddenly fell to the ground. She doesn't sell herself. No matter how much money you offer, you won't sell. The old woman laughed out loud. Little brother, if you're looking for a prostitute, just look for me. Wei Wei isn't special. Her butt isn't big, and her legs are as thin as matchsticks. Only her breasts are moderately sized. It's not that no boss wants to buy her, but she said that she has someone in her heart and is determined not to sell. When the old woman said this, she said to another woman in the same business, "This is the first time I've seen a love-struck person in this place. He's a big boss, and he's offering a high price." Mama Mulberry immediately laughed like her. Hinanshi's frown deepened. These two old women in menopause, are they done laughing? What's wrong with having a sweetheart? Did she eat your rice or hit on your man? He turned around and left. He wanted to go to the private room to order some wine and get his sister-in-law to come back. The two old women behind him were still chattering away. Although that young man is wearing a mask, he looks handsome at first glance. Look at that butt of his as he walks. It's so swaying. It's so strong. Yes, in my experience, he's full of energy. Don't look at his thin figure, he's full of strength. He's stained on the bed. Hinanshi twisted his feet and almost hit the wall. His ears turned red as if they were on fire. Then he walked faster. Suddenly, there were all kinds of excited screams and cheers in front of him. Someone on the high platform went up to take the microphone and was singing and dancing to liven up the atmosphere. Hinanshi wasn't interested at first, but that song, as soon as she opened her mouth, she sang in a low voice. Her voice and deliberately slowed down the words, that skillful and natural, seductive and pure feeling, just for a moment of the lyrics. Hinanshi's footsteps stopped. Chapter 567. He was in the music industry. If it weren't for the He family's incident, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the king of singers in the entertainment industry. Therefore, he was especially sensitive to good sounds. This voice was really good. Suddenly, the slow singing of the voice sped up. The lyrics became more and more rappy, faster and faster, but there wasn't a trace of ambiguity. The clear words and the explosive voice. The atmosphere of the venue was completely livened up. Tips were thrown onto the stage. Hinanshi couldn't help but look up. This glance caused him to be completely stupefied. He saw Wei Wei Bai standing on the stage with heavy makeup on. Her lips were red, her eyelashes were long, and her hair was spread out. She wasn't ugly. But she looked like a completely different person when she removed her makeup. She twisted her waist, and the small hole in the back of her dress faintly revealed her fair skin. Her long hair also looked like a blooming black flower when she turned and danced. She sang and danced, and her voice was steady, mellow, and beautiful. Every move of hers was hot and seductive. Hinanshi had never seen Wei Bai like this before. Although the first time he saw her was at a bar, she wasn't this hot then. Later, after she removed her makeup, she took care of He Dongling with a clean face. She even specially ran over to encourage him. She was more like a soft-hearted, virtuous wife and loving mother. But now, she was a living vixen. Hinanshi's fingers were trembling. Didn't they say that they were just selling drinks? Why was she even on the stage now? Screams kept coming from all around. There were even drunk men shouting, "Take it off, take it off." Hinanshi felt like his head was about to explode. He looked fiercely at the stage, but he realized that Wei Bai's gaze was faintly discernible, mixed with a hint of charm as it swept over him. She seemed to have seen him reveal a smile, and her lips opened and closed slowly. The song was deep and slow. It was as if she was confessing to someone. Hinanshi heard it. It was all her seductive singing. His heart trembled, and his muscles tensed up. His anger and another inexplicable flame intertwined. Hinanshi's temples kept throbbing. Her gaze lightly swept elsewhere, seducing other men to give her tips. $100 bill after another was thrown on the stage. Wei Bai laughed happily and sang even more happily. Her dance moves were even more graceful and beautiful. A drunk man next to Hinanshi impatiently roared, "Tonight brother will buy you, let you twist for brother in bed." He immediately looked over and memorized the face of this wretched and stinky man. Then he walked over to the table, picked up a bottle, turned around, and walked a few steps forward until he was behind the man. He raised his hand and smashed the wine bottle on the vulgar man's head. This retaliatory action didn't take more than 10 seconds. Clean and efficient, without a trace of hesitation. The man screamed as blood flowed from his head. Hinanshi pushed the man away. Hinanshi didn't care about other people's lives and rushed to the stage in anger. Wei Bai lifted her leg and did a more difficult dance move. Hinanshi just happened to be on the stage. He saw that under her raised leg, there were safety pants under her short skirt, and there was still a large part of her white leg. His footsteps were messed up, and he had difficulty breathing. He felt so uncomfortable that he wanted to tear off his mask. Wei Bai. Hinanshi wore a mask and shouted in a muffled voice. Wei Bai turned her head in confusion. She had red lips, a white face, and long eyelashes. Because of her sweat, her clothes were sticking to her body. That faintly discernible appearance was more impactful than being completely naked. To read the full article, phone. Chapter 568. This was his sister-in-law. Hinanshi's sister-in-law had actually fallen to the level of coquettishness on stage. What was the point of singing so beautifully? What was the point of dancing so seductively? Was it for those lowly men to fantasize? Was it just for a few notes? Hinanshi stepped forward angrily and reached out to grab her arm. Wei Bai finally reacted. She dropped the microphone in her hand and a trace of panic flashed across her eyes. Nanshi. Hinanshi's black eyes were filled with irritation. He gritted his teeth and said angrily, "When are you going to fucking stop being cheap? Don't you find it dirty and disgusting to do this work for a few dollars?" Wei Bai pursed her lips. Her eyes were watery. She struggled to blink back her tears. She shook his hand forcefully, but found that he was holding on too tightly. "I'm still working." "What are you doing?" "Let go." Wei Bai's voice trembled, but her tone was firm. Hinanshi sneered, "Work? Do you love this work that much? Sweeping the streets and picking up trash is better than this. You have hands and feet. Do you only know how to sell your body to earn money?" Wei Bai's face was pale under the bright lights. There was a kind of sadness that made her lose her soul. Hinanshi's heart was stabbed. He turned his head and said coldly, "If you don't leave with me today, don't expect me to acknowledge you as my sister-in-law in the future." He thought that if he said that, Wei Wei Bai would leave with him immediately. But in the next second, his fingers were forcefully pried away by her. He Nanshi's heart skipped a beat. He looked over in a panic. He found that Wei Wei Bai was looking at him calmly, but her fingers were clenched tightly. "Go back, Nanshi. This is not a place you should be. You're still young. God, you're still young." Nanshi was so angry that he laughed. She could seduce other men with a smile on her face. When it was his turn, he spoke like a kindergarten auntie. Did he look childish? Nanshi's eyes were burning. His beautiful eyes were so bright that it gave people goosebumps. He strode forward, bending his body, his hand going through her knee, his other hand holding her back. Without any hesitation, he lifted her up by her waist. Wei Wei Bai's entire body was locked in his embrace. Her face touched his chest and she gasped in pain. His muscles were really tough. Moreover, the lines are perfect, leading to a dress. He was tall and thin, and it was impossible to tell that he had such a good figure. She rubbed her face and said, "Nanshi, put me down. I haven't gotten off work yet. It's too late. You should go back first." Nanshi was so infuriated by this woman that he wanted to vomit blood. "Shut up," Yi Zichen said coldly. If she wanted to abandon herself, then so be it. Why did he have to rush forward to save her? Anyway, if she wants to be a hostess, then let her be. Nanshi carried her and was about to leave. There were still tips thrown at his feet. His eyes turned red. He was so angry that he turned red. Just for these few dollars, she almost took off her clothes. He kicked the money a few times and kicked it off the stage. It flew back to the ugly men's faces. The audience was in an uproar. They were having fun. Nanshi smashed the venue. Wasn't this slapping their faces? A few men immediately rushed up the stage. "Fuck you. Where did this idiot come from? Put her down." Nanshi looked at them coldly. His entire person was as sharp as an unsheathed knife. His eyes were full of cold anger. He hugged Wei Wei Bai tightly and dodged a man's fist. Then he lifted his long leg and kicked the man's stomach, kicking him off the stage. This completely aroused the public's anger. Chapter 569. There were all kinds of people in the bar, and with the flashing lights, the drinks were mesmerizing. This combination stimulated a person's hostility. The people below the stage rolled up their sleeves and rushed up with red eyes, wanting to beat Nanshi, the arrogant brat, to the ground. Nanshi was already in a bad mood, and after being provoked by these people, he kicked them off the stage one by one. He had the aura of a man who could hold back 10,000 men. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "These legs are too strong." The system flipped through the information and looked into the details. Yes, he has been practicing taekwondo for many years, and when he gets angry, he likes to kick sandbags with his feet. So when he kicks people, he kicks them like they are sandbags. Bai Wei Wei. In the future, if I accidentally expose myself, or abuse him to make him unhappy, will he kick me like a sandbag? The system said, "It's okay, beating is a sign of affection, and scolding is a sign of love. If you have a deep relationship, kick twice, kick once, and your affinity will increase." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. If I want to have a deep relationship with the system, can I kick it a few times? No matter how strong Nanshi was, his legs would not be able to withstand the attacks of so many people. Someone threw a beer bottle at him, and from that direction, it would hit Wei Wei Bai. Nanshi's pupils shrunk, and he dodged to the side awkwardly. However, he could not avoid another person's fist, and his face was hit to the side, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. Nanshi was expressionless, and he bent his leg, kneeing the person who hit him in the stomach, and the person fell to the ground. However, the mask on his face had fallen off, revealing his youthful and handsome face. Some people found him familiar, he looks so much like Hinanshi. Who? The scumbag king of singers, the one who takes drugs, has one-night stands, and bullies people. He does look like him, but if it's really him, how could he still have the guts to come out? Hinanshi's expression was stiff and cold. He wanted to pretend to be indifferent. But his body was unable to move. Even Wei Wei Bai pushed him away and left his embrace. He didn't stop her. He couldn't suppress his thoughts and went back to the last time he went on stage. As soon as he opened his mouth to sing, the people below booed. He endured the humiliation and planned to finish the song. However, more and more people wanted him to get off the stage. A girl who used to be his die-hard fan ran up the stage with flowers. He thought that he still had supporters and was about to smile. The girl threw the flowers away and threw a rotten egg at his face. Scumbag, how can you still have the face to sing on stage? Being a fan of yours is a stain on my life. That egg had completely smashed him into a daze. It also completely destroyed his self-confidence. And now, it seemed like the scene from that time had reappeared. The people below the stage cast disdainful glances at him one after another, informing him one after another. Hey, are you here to see the scum? Hinanshi. The one from the entertainment circle? I used to like his songs. Fuck, it's really him. I thought the news was smearing his reputation. Look at him, he looks like a scumbag. Those people's sarcastic ridicule was like a wave. Hinanshi pursed his lips tightly. He couldn't help but put his hands in his pockets and clenched them tightly. A trace of helplessness flashed through his vicious eyes. Although his back was straight, his muscles were still trembling. He was like a child who had done something wrong. In the face of everyone's criticism, he could only stand there blankly, not daring to resist. In the midst of others' ridicule, he wanted to escape, but he couldn't move his legs. Suddenly, a clear angry shout rang out. You are the scum. You have an ugly face, a poisonous heart, and a stupid brain. You walk on two legs and look like a human. You haven't learned the quality of a human. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com// Download of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 570. Hinanshi looked up abruptly, only to see Wei Wei Bai holding a microphone with one hand on her waist and one foot on the stereo. She looked just like a cute shrew. She lashed out at the audience. You think you're a judge just because you heard some news? What did my brother do to deserve your scolding? Did he commit murder or arson? He took drugs, someone bellowed. Wei Wei Bai immediately turned her head, her eyes terrifyingly cold. Who told you that he took drugs? Did the police or did you see it? No one could refute this. After all, they had seen some negative news on the internet and followed the crowd. They had seen that before. Wei Wei Bai pushed her long hair away from her chest. She was no longer as hot and seductive as before. She was like an old hen that only cared about her young, and she began to be aggressive. You think he took drugs just because you said so? You're better than the police, aren't you? You think you can bully others just because you say so? Have you bullied others to your doorstep? You're all as stupid as pigs. No, even pigs have higher IQ than you. You believe whatever others say. Do you think I don't know what kind of person my brother is? He's kind-hearted and can't even bear to step on an ant. How can such a child bully others? To put it bluntly, you're all jealous of the rich. When you saw his family fall, you rushed up to step on them. Wei Wei Bai held the microphone in her hand and shouted so loudly that everyone within a radius of dozens of meters could hear her clearly. An 18 or 19-year-old composing and singing in fear. For fans, he suffered gastric bleeding. He didn't buy a model or a yacht when he earned money. He used it to build Hope Primary School and donated it to a foundation for the disabled. He didn't create any scandals or persona. He was scolded by you cowards to the International Music Awards. He didn't even get to win glory for the country. Aren't you ashamed? Hinanshi turned to look at her in a daze. Under the lights, her face was sweaty and the cheap cosmetics were a little smudged. Her black eyeliner had faded and her lips were not as red as before. But her eyes were clear and bright. Her thin and weak body rushed to the front of the stage. She blocked him. She defended him. Hinanshi blinked strenuously. His eyes were a little sour. He didn't know what he was feeling, but he seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Every time someone scolded him, he hoped that someone would stand on his side and go against the world. She had to speak up for him. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Wei Weibai scolded everyone, and the system couldn't help but remind her, there are a few people below who are on the verge of exploding. If you don't leave now, you'll be beaten to a pulp. Wei Weibai, who was enjoying herself with the microphone, froze. When he lowered his head, he saw that the faces of those bastards were not looking too good. She said very calmly, that's why it's important to be a kind person. Only then will the world be at peace. Thank you for listening. Let's meet again next time. After saying that, Wei Weibai threw away the wheat in her hand. She then turned around and ran to Hinanshi's side. Without hesitation, she held his hand and pulled him along while he was still in a daze. As expected, the people behind him were enraged. All kinds of wine bottles, chairs, and glasses were thrown at them. Wei Weibai grabbed Hinanshi and fled. She found a back door, opened it, and rushed out. It was the alley behind the bar. It was different from the front door of the bar. It was so quiet that only the lonely street lights accompanied them. Wei Weibai let out a sigh of relief. Her face was covered in sweat and she looked a little tired. It's okay, Nanshi. Hinanshi heard her soft voice and spoke with a hint of laughter. // Chapter 571. He looked down at her silently and found that her eye makeup was all smudged. He couldn't help but reach out and grab a loose sleeve to wipe her eyes. Wei Weibai was stunned and a trace of confusion flashed past her eyes. Hinanshi said softly, "Don't move." Her eyelashes fluttered and she obediently didn't move. Instead, she looked at him with a pair of almond eyes. Hinanshi wiped away the powder on her face. He couldn't help but say, "Don't buy this kind of makeup in the future. It's not good for your skin." It didn't even have a waterproof function. It didn't look good either. The price was definitely cheap. Wei Weibai's eyes were a little misty. She seemed to be a little hesitant and her lips were pursed. In the end, it turned into a faint okay. Hinanshi looked down at her and suddenly asked, "How do you know so much?" Wei Weibai looked at him in confusion. Under the dim yellow street lights, there was a layer of hazy light on her skin. Hinanshi pursed his thin lips slightly and his beautiful eyebrows knitted unnaturally. His black eyes stared at her face. "How do you know that I have gastric bleeding and that I do charity?" He didn't do any of these things. He also didn't buy advertisements to create a persona for himself. The only people who knew were his hardcore fans. Could it be that his brother said it? No, his brother was busy with the family business and didn't have time to care about him, so he wouldn't know. Wei Weibai was silent. She looked at him a little flustered and then lowered her head. Her face was a little red. She looked a little shy. She hesitated for a moment before she mumbled something in a low voice. The quiet alley and the estimated street lights shrouded them. Hinanshi was a little confused and asked, "What did you say?" Bai Weiwei raised her head and quickly swept a glance at him. Her eyes moved, and there was a kind of breathtaking beauty. "I'm your fan." Hinanshi was stunned and looked at her in a daze. Under the light, her face was a little red from being rubbed by him. Her skin looked even more fragile and delicate. The tip of her nose was also red, like a glass doll. He repeated in a daze, "My fans? Does he still have fans?" He saw with his own eyes that his fan club was disbanded. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled slightly. "I like your songs very much, not because you're Dongling's younger brother, but because I simply like you." She simply liked him. This sentence was pure and straightforward, and it immediately hit the bottom of his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. Hinanshi blushed, but he reacted quickly. When Wei Wei Bai said that she liked him, she meant that she liked his songs. Not his people. Hinanshi blushed even harder. His mind was in a mess. After all, his sister-in-law was his fan. He didn't even think about it. His mind spun with some effort. In the past, when he saw his own fans, what should he do to not feel awkward? Hinanshi said after a long time, "Do you want me to give you an autograph?" When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. Halfway through, she was worried that he would feel awkward, so she could only suppress her smile. Her eyes were full of smiles as she said sweetly to him, "Okay." Hinanshi's breathing was disorderly for a few beats. His eyes trembled a bit before leaving her smiling face. He didn't know what was wrong with him. His heart was beating very fast. Hinanshi instinctively didn't want to think too deeply about it. Suddenly, his phone rang. Hinanshi reached out to get his phone, but halfway through, he remembered that he had already turned off his phone at home. He looked up. He saw Wei Wei Bai take out a random smartphone and answer the call. The ringtone was "Sunny Day That Loves You." It was a song that he had composed, and it was also his favorite song. It had been a ringtone for many years. He didn't expect that Wei Wei Bai also liked to use this song as a ringtone. Chapter 572. The smile on her face faded bit by bit, and her tone softened. "Dad." This was Wei Wei Bai's father. Hinanshi didn't know much about Wei Wei Bai, especially her family. He didn't know what to feel, but he couldn't help but strain his ears to listen. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around and take a few steps forward to distance herself from him. Hinanshi looked at her lonely figure. With her back to him, her slender shoulders were tense and trembling. He couldn't help but frown and take a few steps forward. Finally, he heard her soft and gentle voice. "Dad, you know my situation. I know that my brother just started university and needs money, but the He family situation, no, I mean next month. Next month, I can send home my salary from the bar. Can I keep some of it this time? Dongling is still lying in the hospital. I want to help. Nanshi is still young and needs living expenses, what the hell?" Young? He was 19 years old and still young. Hinanshi's footsteps stiffened as he heard her careful conversation with her father. For a moment, his mind was noisy. He felt sad and touched. Even if this woman was stupid and didn't cherish herself, why did she come to drink with him when she couldn't do anything else? But at least, she didn't run away just because they were bankrupt. Wei Wei Bai was still trying to fight for living expenses. "Dad, I really need money. I don't mean to ignore my brother. I'll support him." The phone in her hand was suddenly snatched away. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw Hinanshi looking at her with a gloomy expression. He roughly knew her status in the family just by listening to a few words. Which daughter would be so humble in front of her father? Moreover, she had a useless brother who was already in university but still needed his sister to support him. Hinanshi's mind immediately outlined a strange family that favored boys over girls. He put the phone to his ear and heard a scolding voice coming from the other end. "What do you mean? It's fine if you send back so little money every time, but you don't want to send it this time?" In Hinanshi's dark eyes, a flame of anger ignited. What's so good about the He family? Didn't they go bankrupt? When they weren't bankrupt, their family didn't acknowledge you at all. Didn't your mother-in-law make all the companies reject your job and force you to be a bar hostess? Hinanshi's pupils shrank when he heard this. What did that mean? He suddenly looked over and found Weiwei Bai standing beside him anxiously. Her face was red, and her eyes were red. She looked at him pleadingly with tears in her eyes. He seemed to want to reach out and snatch his phone back. Hinanshi reached out with one hand and easily grabbed her wrist. It restrained her from snatching the item. However, the cursing on the other end of the phone did not stop. What's the point of me giving birth to you and raising you? You can't even afford to raise your younger brother. Anyway, you're already a hostess and you're not innocent. What's the point of being a whore and having a chastity? You might as well be a complete whore. This sentence meant that he wanted her to sell her body. Hinanshi's mind was a little blank. When he came back to his senses, he could no longer suppress his irritation and anger. What did you say, old fart? The old fart on the other end of the phone was stunned. Who are you? Where's my daughter? Hinanshi was so angry that he laughed. He squeezed the words out from between his teeth. Yo, those who know clearly know that she's your daughter, but those who don't would think that you're forcing her into prostitution. What did you ask my sister-in-law to do just now? Be a whore. Chapter 573. You can search, Transmigration System, Adonis, come over to search book, www.sashu.com, on Baidu to find the Be a bitch, these 3 words. It was like a burning brand. Every word rolled across the tip of his tongue. All of them were burning with intense pain. Hinanshi's eyes were red with anger. Weiwei Bai is already married into our family. She's part of our family. Who are you to order her around? You're Weiwei's brother-in-law. Why are you interrupting when I'm lecturing my daughter? I'm still your elder. Hinanshi retorted sarcastically. He directly raised the flag of the remnants of feudalism and vividly displayed the feudal ideology of the old society. Your daughter married into the He family. She has nothing to do with your family. She was born a member of the He family and will die a ghost of the He family. The old man said, You. Hinanshi said, Are you stuttering? Do you know the situation of the He family now? We owe tens of billions. As my sister-in-law, Weiwei Bai is at least 2.5 billion in debt. You insist that she's your daughter. Fine, the father will pay the daughter's debt. Tomorrow, I'll go to your house to collect more than 1 billion in debt. 2.5 billion. This unfilial daughter owes so much money. Don't call me in the future. With that said, the other party hung up. This was the first time Hinanshi had seen such an outrageous father. It was an eye-opener. Weiwei Bai finally broke free from his hand and reached out to snatch her phone. She anxiously put the phone to her ear and hurriedly explained, Dad, don't be careful of what Nanshi says. He's a child who likes to spout nonsense. I'm hanging up. Weiwei Bai frantically tried to call him again. Hinanshi reached out and snatched her phone away. He threw it on the floor and raised his foot to stomp on it. Crack! It broke. Weiwei Bai looked up. She was finally angry. Hinanshi, why did you smash my phone? Hinanshi put his hands in his pockets. His posture was a little slack. His face was dark. Why do you still acknowledge those vampires as your family? I've never seen such a father. A father who let his daughter be sold. He was worse than a beast. Weiwei Bai was so angry that she was trembling. Even if he isn't, he is still my father. Hinanshi could not understand. What kind of family was this? This must be a vampire and a leech. Hating iron for not becoming steel, Hinanshi's heart was filled with a sense of powerlessness. He snorted. It's just a cell phone. I'll compensate you with 10. Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. It's not the phone's problem. It's my dad who will misunderstand me and kick me out of the house. Hinanshi did not understand why anyone would want to return to that kind of family. He pursed his thin lips and looked at her coldly. Suddenly, he turned around and said through gritted teeth, "Up to you. If you want to go back and be exploited and sold, that's your problem. Just consider me a busybody." When he turned his head, there was a hint of grievance in his eyes. Unbearable emotions were rolling in his heart. His good intentions were treated as ill intent. He had only taken a few steps when a corner of his clothes was grabbed and pulled. Hinanshi suddenly stopped in his tracks. Her calm and gentle voice came from behind him. "I have nowhere to go." Hinanshi was a little confused. Nowhere to go. Bai Weiwei's flat, but suppressed, voice continued to sound. "Nanshi, I'm different from you. Since you were young, everyone doted on you and loved you. Even if you're in dire straits now, you still have a home to return to." Although his brother was in a vegetative state, his parents had run away. However, this was all temporary. To Hinanshi, the He family was not broken up yet. There was still a place he could return to. Chapter 574. Her voice was trembling. "But I don't. Of course, I know that my parents don't treat me well. They like my younger brother more, but that's the only place I can go back to, Nanshi." Hinanshi was flustered. He pursed his lips tightly, and his face was pale. Don't you still have the He family? She was already married to his brother, wasn't she?" Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Hinanshi finally reacted. She was really touching his sore spot. Even if he didn't come back, he would still receive complaints from his parents every day. At that time, Wei Wei Bai was hated by everyone in the He family. How could she treat such a place as her home? Furthermore, "My parents didn't let you work?" Hinanshi's words were a little bitter, and even his tone sounded a little guilty. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and clenched her fists tightly. Her figure looked slender and weak. She turned to look at the street lamp beside her. "No, it's because my education is not good and my work ability is not good. That's why no one wants me." Hinanshi's voice was as cold as ice. "It's impossible that you can't find a company in the entire city that wants you. Furthermore, Wei Wei Bai's appearance was so outstanding. Every company needed this kind of image at the front desk. Unless someone said hello, no one wanted her. This kind of business circle was very complicated. Furthermore, when the He family was still in business, they had the power to cover the entire city. With a call, Wei Wei Bai was blacklisted. Which company, big or small, dared to hire her? Hinanshi was so angry that his liver hurt when he thought of these dirty things. Wei Wei Bai just smiled. Her smile was indescribably helpless, as if she was already used to such treatment. Bun, soft bun, super soft bun. Hinanshi had never seen such a soft bun. She deserved to be bullied to death. Didn't she know how to resist? Hinanshi had a fiery temper, so when he saw Wei Wei Bai's gentle and weak personality, he felt extremely uncomfortable. He turned around and left, saying fiercely, "You're so easy to bully. You're such a big idiot. If you're being oppressed by your weird parents, you should just take it back." Even if he was hated by his parents, there was still his older brother. He could grab hold of his older brother's heart and then fight back. Would she become an evil daughter-in-law? Hinanshi thought of how much she had been bullied. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. The more he thought about it, the more he felt aggrieved for her. He turned around fiercely, his eyes as fierce as a wolf cub's. There was no sign of Wei Wei Bai behind him. He walked quickly and thought that she had been following him, so he did not look back. In the end, where was he? Hinanshi panicked in his heart. He immediately spread his feet and ran back the way he came. The streets in the middle of the night were extremely cold. A few drops of rain fell on his hair, and then more and more rain fell. Hinanshi couldn't care less about shielding himself from the rain. He pursed his lips tightly and ran around with his body dripping wet. Wei Bai. Wei Bai, where did you go? She couldn't have returned to that weird family of hers and been bullied by her parents, right? Hinanshi panicked and shouted, "Sister-in-law." Amidst the sound of rain, a weak reply was faintly discernible. Hinanshi's ears were sensitive and he immediately heard it. He turned around and saw a weak figure squatting in the corner in front of him. He rushed over and found Wei Bai squatting in the corner. The rain fell on her body. She buried her head in her knees and shivered all over. Hinanshi's expression was tense. He gritted his teeth, took off his coat and put it on her. He also put the hood on her. Then he reached out and carried her in his arms. He ran forward in the rain. The person in his arms seemed to be frightened. Her body trembled. Hinanshi's heart twitched. It was painful and unbearable. He swallowed the sourness in his throat and said, "I went too far just now, but you really are easy to bully." Wei Bai, Hinanshi's voice, clearer than the rain, sounded again. "So if anyone bullies you in the future, you can tell me. I'll help you bully them back." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Who told you to be my sister-in-law?" Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 20. Chapter 575. Tongzi, why do I feel like an angel is singing? You're confused by the fever. Why am I having a fever again? What do you mean by again? Are you talking about the time you put the thermometer in the cup? At most, you're just having a fever. The above was Wei Bai's daily conversation with the system. She only remembered in a daze that she seemed to have messed around with Hinanshi at the bar last night. Then, they were drenched in the rain for a while before they managed to get a taxi home. Then, she had no recollection of it at all. Did Hinanshi do XXOO to the unconscious me? Stop. No, nothing at all. You took off your clean clothes yourself and put them on yourself. Then, you climbed into bed yourself. It has nothing to do with your brother-in-law at all. Don't try to frame him. Wei Bai rubbed her temples. Because of the fever, her heart was throbbing. She sighed. I thought that teenagers who have just passed puberty would be more impulsive. Last night, I acted like I was wet and seductive, but he didn't react at all. System, wet and seductive. Last night, the host had a fever and didn't know how frighteningly red her face was. Hinanshi was so scared that his face turned pale. He fed her medicine and ran to the clinic to give her an injection. Who would be in the mood to be impulsive after such a long time? Wei Bai's limbs were sore and weak. It was a feeling of weakness that was unique to sick people. She sat up with difficulty and was about to get off the bed when she realized that the door was open. Hinanshi walked in with a tray of food. When he saw Wei Bai's feet just touch the ground, he immediately frowned and his heart skipped a beat. He put the tray on the table and rushed in front of her. Your fever has just subsided. Have a good rest. After saying that, he bent over, held her feet and put them back on the bed. Then, he pulled the blanket over her. His series of actions were very smooth and nimble. Wei Bai had long realized that Hinanshi was a very efficient person. Everything he did could only be described as fast. Therefore, she did not notice that when Hinanshi grabbed her leg, his fingers stopped trembling for a moment on her ankle, as if he was feeling the delicate sensation of her skin. Hinanshi passed the porridge to her. Just eat some. I don't have an auntie now. I'll call and hire another one in the afternoon. Even if you don't like it, you should eat some. Wei Bai took the bowl and looked at him deeply. Hinanshi was a little embarrassed to look away. She couldn't help but smile, and her eyes curved up. She actually looked happy and cute. Thank you, Nancy. Hinanshi's face was tense as he humphed. After a long while, he said, We're on the same side. There's no need to thank me. This was an acknowledgement of her sister-in-law's position. After finishing the porridge, Wei Wei Bai fell asleep again. She had to rest well to have the energy to attack. She was very open-minded and continued to rest. When Hinanshi came in after putting the bowl away, he saw Wei Wei Bai sleeping. In the morning light, a layer of golden light shone on her fair face. Gentle and pretty. He suddenly thought of the night before, when she sang and danced confidently on the stage. Even if it had a vulgar and noisy feeling that was unique to that occasion. But her voice still penetrated his eardrums clearly. It brought a terrifying and stunning feeling. Hinanshi knew that his strength was in composing. Although his singing was good, it was still inferior to Wei Wei Bai's impactful voice. She had such talent. She was actually buried in a bar. Thinking of her family background, Hinanshi directly faced the difference in starting points between people for the first time. Chapter 576. He was able to live a smooth life in the He family and become a little king of singers in the entertainment industry. She, on the other hand, was struggling to make ends meet. She had nothing. Hinanshi's heart softened. For the first time, he had a feeling of understanding towards someone. At the same time, another kind of inspiration suddenly surged into his mind. Ever since he was scolded off the stage, he had no inspiration to compose. Today was the first time he had the inspiration to write a song. Another connected room in his room had been transformed into his music room. Hinanshi walked in and sat down in front of the piano. He then began to compose a tune with the piano. Gentle melodies were written out one by him. Surprisingly, it was smooth. During this time, he came out and opened the door to let in the cleaning and cooking ants he hired. Then, he continued to compose. Wei Wei Bai woke up in a daze and asked, "Why do I hear an angel singing again?" The system said, "The male lead is composing a song." Wei Wei Bai strained his ears to listen. He vaguely heard a few gentle melodies from the music room. "It's quite nice. What song is it?" The system stretched its eyes and looked, "It's a song based on you." Wei Wei Bai was excited. He slapped the bed and said, "The restlessness of adolescence." He even wrote a song for me. Will 100 favorability be far away? The system said, "The name of the song is My Sister-in-Law Who Is Like a Loving Mother." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. The system said cheerfully, "Actually, the favorability of kinship can be farmed. Look, the brother-in-law and sister-in-law are like a loving mother and filial son. It's so great." Wei Wei Bai listened and felt that it made sense. Do I have to put on the airs of an old mother and get along with Hinanshi, this good boy? The system said, "Of course you can. The highest score for kinship is 90. If you work hard, you might reach 90 easily." Wei Wei Bai keenly sensed that something was wrong. What does 90 mean? The system said, even if the familial favorability meter is maxed out, it'll still be 90. However, you can use the remaining 10 favorability meters to farm for love. Wei Wei Bai's brain wasn't as useless as the system's. When the family was full, it meant that the spirit was full. Hinanshi really saw her as his family, and it was a familial bond that could not be changed. They were not blood-related, but they were spiritually blood-related. This kind of unchangeable familial and spiritual relationship. And in the end, it suddenly changed into love. That's more incestuous than incest. The last 10 points were simply a hellish level of difficulty. Wei Wei Bai felt like she had nothing to live for. Forget it. Let's just do the undeniably hot thing between my sister-in-law and brother-in-law in the middle of the night. Hee. Kinship is too difficult. The system said, "But he even wrote a song for you, my dear sister-in-law." Wei Wei Bai sat up abruptly. Yes, this won't do. If this goes on, even if it's not familial, it will become familial. Would you have unspeakable feelings for your own family? Unless you were a pervert, it was impossible for normal people to have such feelings, okay? Hinanshi, on the other hand, had come from so many planes, so he was the most normal target to be conquered. So if the impression of my dear sister-in-law was too deep, she could only look on helplessly as the 90 favorability points hung above her head, hanging there until the time was up. She could almost imagine that despairing scene. Wei Wei Bai said affectionately, Nanshi, actually, I have unspeakable feelings for you. Hinanshi's expression changed. I treat you like a mother, and you want to sleep with me. Wei Wei Bai. Mother. Hinanshi, a motherly sister-in-law. Wei Wei Bai could not help but tremble just thinking about that scene. No, divorce, you must divorce. The. Chapter 577. System, didn't you keep the divorce agreement? You just need to sign it and we'll be divorced. That divorce agreement had He Dongling's signature. It would take effect immediately once it was signed. Wei Wei Bai held her chin and narrowed her eyes, a cold light flashing in them. How can it be so easy to divorce? He Dongling, that vegetable waste, has to be reused. The system was confused. He's already in a vegetative state, how can we use him? He can't get hard. Wei Wei Bai, this car is a bit sudden. She calmly coughed and continued, first brush up a wave of affectionate sister-in-law persona, then open up his brother's rotten affairs. That impact can directly remove the identity of sister-in-law in Hinanshi's heart. After all, the identity of the victim. It was much better than the identity of the sister-in-law. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 25. Wei Wei Bai trembled, why did the favorability increase? The system was very calm, sister-in-law's song was written and he was happy, so it increased. These 5 favorability points were kinship points. She felt that 90 points of kinship points were waving at her. Wei Wei Bai immediately surged with great strength. She struggled to get off the bed and changed her clothes, planning to go out. Hinanshi heard the movement and came out of the music room to see Wei Wei Bai struggling to get out of the door. He looked at the time and found that it was just the right time for the bar to be open. Could it be that she still wanted to go to work? Thinking about those blood-sucking leeches of his family, a trace of anger flashed in his dark eyes. His slender legs took a step that was like Wei Wei Bai's 3 steps. Just as she opened the door, his strong fingers pressed down hard and pressed the door back. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She looked up blankly and saw that it was Hinanshi, then she sighed in relief. Nanshi, I'm going out. Hinanshi frowned and snorted, you're not allowed to go to the bar. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly for a moment before lowering her head. She said somewhat gloomily, I won't be going for the time being. After causing such a ruckus, the bar doesn't want me anymore. I reckon I won't be able to get next month's salary either. My father will nag again. Hinanshi couldn't bear to see her act like a soft bun. She really felt bad for her. His delicate face carried traces of arrogance and anger. You shouldn't have gone to that place in the first place. Also, don't send money to your family. Isn't that useless brother of yours already in university? How old are you? Wei Wei Bai was pressured by his imposing manner to the point that she couldn't breathe. She said softly, 19. Hinanshi's eyes turned cold, and he sneered, you're the same age as me, and I've earned enough money to support myself for 18 lifetimes. Why does your good-for-nothing brother still have to rely on you to go to college? Wei Wei Bai's lips tightened and her face turned pale. Her voice suddenly became louder, you're not the same. Hinanshi's words paused, thinking that she was going to say that her family was rich or something like that. But he heard her voice soften, you're not the same, you're a genius. These words were like candy that was suddenly stuffed into Hinanshi's mouth and into his heart. It was very sweet. Hinanshi's face turned red. To hide his shyness, he immediately straightened his neck and shamelessly admitted it, nonsense, of course I'm a genius. Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 30. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help knocking on the system, it can't be affection, right? The system sighed. This was the first time it had seen such an unconfident host. It said, I can only tell you that this little brother currently doesn't have any impure thoughts towards you. Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Transmigration system, male god, come here Akama. Chapter 578. Or perhaps it had happened, but the person himself didn't even realize it. Therefore, the current favorability rating was so pure that it didn't have any negative feelings. Wei Bai sighed. A beautiful sister-in-law is right in front of you. How can you not have any thoughts? That's too beastly. System, Hinanshi saw that Wei Bai was in a daze and immediately said, it's no use saying that I'm a genius. You can't go out. What's your condition now? You're so tired. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before saying, but I want to see your brother. Hinanshi was a little confused. See my brother? Wei Bai immediately looked up and there was a hint of light in her eyes. Dongling is still in the hospital. I have to take care of him at least once a day. Even if there's a caretaker, he needs to be accompanied by a family member. Hinanshi then remembered that his brother was still lying in the hospital. His face darkened. I'll go and see him. You should rest. Wei Bai reached out and pried open his fingers that were pressing on the door. She looked up with a gentle gaze. No, he's my husband. It's my duty to take care of him. Husband, Hinanshi's head was knocked by this word and his fingers went soft. He was at a loss for a moment. He didn't seem to be in a position to stop her from seeing he Dongling. Bai Wei smiled, opened the door, and walked out. Halfway through, her cuff was grabbed. She turned back. Hinanshi stretched out his slender fingers and clenched them so tightly that the tips of his fingers were a little white. He pursed his lips and stared at her with his beautiful eyes. I'll go too. After saying that, he felt that this sentence sounded very cowardly and immediately said, he's my brother too. It's my duty to take care of him. Bai Wei raised her eyes to look at him, and he felt a little unnatural. Then she revealed a soft and sweet smile. Okay. In the hospital. Wei Bai lovingly wiped He Dongling's face and hands, looking as gentle as a loving mother. Good boy, who are you calling? Wei Bai said, He Dongling. Wei Bai sighed. I can't help it. If I don't smash him, I won't be able to show such an affectionate expression. No matter how bad my son is and how much I want to strangle him, I still think he's cute. Cute. Wei Bai looked at He Dongling with an even more benevolent expression. The system shuddered as goosebumps appeared all over its body. Hinanshi felt that he was unnecessary. He sat at the side and watched with a cold expression as Wei Bai wiped his brother with a gentle expression. What right did his parents have to dislike such a good sister-in-law? They did not despise the poor and loved the rich. They even went through thick and thin together. If it were him, he wouldn't even be able to wait for it. Hinanshi stopped this idea and continued to stay with a black face and a thick face. He should be happy that his brother had such a good wife, but he did not know why he was holding back his anger. Wei Bai gave a lot of instructions to the nurse and then said to Hinanshi, let's go to the doctor and find out more about your brother's condition. Hinanshi sighed in relief and nodded immediately. He did not know why he felt so suffocated in this room. The two of them went to the doctor, and the doctor nagged a lot. Hinanshi was distracted again. He could not help but look at Wei Bai. She listened attentively without a trace of impatience. Her side profile was gentle, her eyelashes were long, and her beautiful eyes had a few traces of moisture. Hinanshi looked at her and his gaze deepened. He suddenly stood up. Wei Bai looked at him in surprise. Hinanshi said with a cold expression, I'm going to the toilet. With that said, he left. He was a little upset and did not know why. He walked to his brother's ward unknowingly. Before he entered, he heard a familiar woman's voice coming from the room. Bastard, you became a vegetable just like that. Have you ever thought about my feelings? When you slept with me, you were so lively. Now, you're like a dead person. Slept with me. Hinanshi froze and then stretched his head out to look. In the end, he saw his father's little lover lowering her head and kissing his brother. Hinanshi felt as if a bolt of lightning had flashed over his head. Nanshi. Weiwei Bai's voice came from behind. Hinanshi felt as if 10,000 bolts of lightning had flashed over his head. Is at https://www. Sashu. Com. Chapter 579. His face flushed red and his body was as stiff as a rock. He forced himself to say, "I'll let go now." Him pressing down like this was simply the action of a hooligan. Hinanshi let go of her hand awkwardly and then took a few steps back. His face was red and so were his ears. His legs were weak and he felt that the ground he was stepping on was not solid. It was as if it would collapse at any time. The sound of the high heels was also far away. Hinanshi knew that he should relax, but he didn't know why, but he felt even more nervous. Weiwei Bai frowned and asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Your face is red." Hinanshi reached out and quickly rubbed his face. Red? It's not red, right? The weather is a little hot, ha. Weiwei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. It's good that you're fine. Your brother's ward is next door. Why did you drag me here? After saying that, she was about to open the door and leave. But Hinanshi's extraordinary hearing was activated again. That familiar shameless footsteps actually sounded again. And this time, it wasn't limping. It actually walked over and just walked to the door of their room. If this door was opened, the B*TCH's mistress faced his weak and pitiful sister-in-law. It would be too much. This was an Azura field to the nth power. Hinanshi didn't even think about it. He stretched out his long legs and his body was as swift as a bird of prey. He suddenly appeared behind Weiwei Bai. He pressed his hands hard against the door. He pressed down on the door that Weiwei Bai had just opened. Weiwei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw the tall and thin Hinanshi with both hands on top of her head. His body was like a prison, enveloping her below. Her face was a little pale. She finally couldn't suppress the doubts in her heart. Nanshi? Hinanshi listened to the footsteps outside. He looked down helplessly at Weiwei Bai who was locked under his body. His mind was in a mess, as if it had been ravaged by the flames of war between aliens and Earthlings. How was he going to explain this? He really wanted to go online immediately and send a message asking for help. How am I going to explain that it's a misunderstanding when I'm pressing my sister-in-law down? Wait, what if he saw this kind of post on the internet? Shouldn't his first reaction be, "Sister-in-law, what are you waiting for? Go." The replies under the post were definitely unsightly. Weiwei Bai's expression turned serious. Nanshi, what are you doing? Hinanshi was dumbfounded. He also wanted to know what he was going to do. He saw that her expression was getting uglier and uglier, and the suspicion in her eyes was getting more and more obvious. Hinanshi didn't even have time to think before he said, "This is actually a misunderstanding." Weiwei Bai looked at him lovingly. What misunderstanding? Hinanshi's lips became clumsy, but his ears were still desperately trying to hear the footsteps outside. Was that slut's mistress crippled? Why were they still standing outside their door? Were they going to leave or not? He held it in for a long time, but his brain couldn't come up with a normal reason. He couldn't say that he wanted to play hide and seek with her, right? He felt that he was retarded before he even said that. Weiwei Bai suddenly reached out and gently slid her hand over his waist. Hinanshi's eyes widened. His waist was a sensitive spot, and his whole body trembled as if he had been electrocuted. He blinked his eyes, and his body was as hard as a rock. In the end, Wei Wei Bai's fingers slipped into his trouser pocket and took out the black mask that he had casually stuffed in. Then she pursed her lips and said to him gently, "Lower your head, Nanshi." Nanshi looked as if he was hypnotized and lowered his head in a daze. Wei Wei Bai reached out and put the mask on him. "Did you see a fan who knows you?" Nanshi's eyes immediately lit up. He lowered his head in a panic and said in a muffled voice, "Yes, no, it's not a fan. It's just a slut paparazzi." Wei Wei Bai nodded in understanding. Then she looked at the door and said softly, "Has the paparazzi left?" Nanshi listened to the sound of people's footsteps coming and going outside, but he didn't seem to hear the sound of high heels. "She should have left." Nanshi looked at Wei Wei Bai's gentle face and said unnaturally, "No, reporters are very patient." Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 580. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Is that so? Then let's wait a little longer." Nanshi nodded quickly. Then, he continued to support her head with both hands. His body was almost on top of hers. He didn't dare to move in this position. And Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to think too much. Instead, she looked at the door as if waiting for the paparazzi outside to leave. Nanshi found a reason and his emotions calmed down. His rationality also started to return. The rest of the things that he had overlooked earlier slowly appeared in his vision. She was so petite, Nanshi's gaze fell on her body. From this height, it was easy to see her hair tied up in a bun. A few strands of irregular short hair fell to the side of her neck. Her neck was as fair as a ball of delicate snow. Such a bright white that extended all the way down. The collar wasn't big, but it was slightly open. He could almost see the delicate shoulder bones that were faintly discernible under her clothes. Nanshi held his breath and his eyes trembled again. There were many beautiful women in the entertainment industry, but most of them were made up. Although their facial features were beautiful, their skin was bumpy. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, had the most beautiful skin he had ever seen. It was so beautiful that it seemed to be transparent, but also had a soft touch. It felt very nice to touch. When she came back to her senses, his fingers had already gently touched the skin on the back of her neck with his fingertips. It was so smooth and tender that it brought a faint electric current. Wei Wei Bai turned around a little slowly. Her beautiful facial features, delicate eyebrows, and a hint of innocence directly crashed into his eyes just like that. "Have the reporters left?" Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his actions and asked softly. Nanshi lowered his eyes. His voice was muffled and had an imperceptible tremor. "They left." Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good. Then let's go out." Nanshi immediately retreated and no longer shrouded her. She opened the door and carefully looked outside. "There are no reporters, Nanshi." Of course, there were no reporters. It was all made up by him. Nanshi followed Wei Wei Bai into the ward. Dongling was still in a vegetative state. Wei Wei Bai smiled amiably and walked over. She turned on the music and played some nursery rhymes for him. Dongling is actually very childish. He likes the nursery rhyme of "a flock of ducks in front of the door" the most. If you play more of it, he might wake up because he's happy. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of love, almost blinding the eyes of others. Nanshi absent-mindedly glanced at his cheating brother and then at his beautiful and gentle sister-in-law. Then, his eyes accidentally fell on the table, and his pupils shrank. What the hell are those red roses on the table? Did that bitch bring them here? He took a step forward, picked up the red roses, and threw them into the trash can. He heaved a sigh of relief after throwing it away. Nanshi belatedly realized that he wasn't the one who cheated. Why was he so nervous? Hinanshi felt like he had held more than 10 concerts without rest in the few hours that he had been taking care of Hidongling. When they went back, Wei Weibai found that something was wrong with him. When they were going up the stairs, she suddenly walked up a few floors and turned around to look at Hinanshi. Hinanshi looked up and a hand touched his forehead softly. He was stunned and realized that Wei Weibai, who was standing a few floors above, was looking at him seriously. Her sweet and gentle breath accidentally brushed against his face. It was like the tip of a feather gently brushing against his heart. Wei Weibai frowned and muttered worriedly, "You don't have a fever. Why are you so pale?" Hinanshi could not bear her pure concern. He pursed his thin lips and lowered his thick eyelashes to cover the inexplicable emotions in his eyes. "I'm fine." Wei Weibai smiled. "It's good that you're fine." Hinanshi suddenly asked, "You have a good relationship with my brother, don't you?" Chapter 581. When Hidongling got into a car accident, his family said that he had gone to look for Wei Weibai. So it was Wei Weibai's fault that he had become a vegetable. At that time, he also thought that was the case, so he blamed this woman for a period of time. But if his brother was really infatuated, then what was going on with his father's little lover today? If he remembered correctly, the direction of his brother's car accident was in. It should be the direction of his little lover's apartment. Hinanshi's eyes turned cold. Wei Weibai didn't seem to notice his complicated emotions. Instead, she smiled shyly. "Your brother is the best person I've ever met." With that, she turned and walked up the stairs. As she walked, she said cheerfully, "He's the first man to send me flowers, and he didn't mind that I wasn't born in a good family and was willing to marry me." Sending flowers and marrying her was considered a good man? Hinanshi felt that something was wrong. He suddenly asked, "Did my brother transfer some property in the city to you?" Wei Weibai stopped in her tracks and turned around in confusion. "What property?" Hinanshi immediately caught the main point. "Did he give you the key to his private vault?" Wei Weibai was even more confused. Hinanshi felt aggrieved. "Don't tell me that he didn't even give you the family heirloom emerald jewelry." These were all things that Hidongling should give his wife. And they were the most basic things. If Hidongling really liked Wei Weibai, then he wouldn't just give her these. He would also give her a lot of property. Wei Weibai smiled stiffly. Her fingers clutched the corner of her shirt helplessly. "Nanshi, Dongling didn't give me this, so you can't give it to me now." Hinanshi was anxious. "Who would give you this?" "That's not what I meant." Did she think that he was going to snatch her money? Hinanshi furrowed his brows fiercely. His eyes were filled with fire as he said, "My brother, if he doesn't give you anything, how is he treating you well?" He hadn't said that out loud yet. Wei Weibai softly said, "Love can't be measured by money. Although Dongling has never given me money, he is indeed very gentle to me." How much was gentleness worth? Who didn't know how to say a few sweet nothings? Hinanshi curled his lips coldly. "A good man is willing to spend money for you." Those who were unwilling to spend money were scumbags. Wei Weibai added, "Sometimes, when I was bullied, he would secretly comfort me. Just thinking about it warms my heart." Hinanshi felt a chill in his heart when he heard that. Fuck, his woman was being bullied. He immediately kicked the man until half of his body was paralyzed. What the hell was she secretly comforting him for? It was normal for a man to bully someone in front of them, fight back, and fight back. Those who couldn't do it were definitely the scumbags of scumbags. Wei Weibai's tone was light. "Although he has never given me money or accompanied me to buy things, and is often so busy that I can't see him, and likes to not return home at night, I know that he is busy. I am very considerate of him. He didn't give her money, he didn't give her anything. She couldn't see him, and he didn't return home at night. Was this her husband? This was practically a missing person." Hinanshi felt so suffocated that he was about to vomit blood. She was being bullied like this and she still felt good about it. Wei Wei Bai continued, so, Dongling became like this because of me. I will take care of him for the rest of my life. Even if I have to sell my blood, I will not let him have a bad life. They were already at the door. Hinanshi reached out to open the door and stared at her for a while. His expression was tense, as if he was about to explode and beat someone up at any time. Chapter 582. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she saw that the favorability had increased again. She was worried that it was affection. She yawned and opened the bathroom door, only to see Hinanshi nervously scrubbing underwear. Hinanshi and Wei Wei Bai looked at each other. Wei Wei Bai was the first to react. She was like a small animal, carefully retreating. She was worried that she would scare Hinanshi. You woke up so early, Nanshi. You can use the bathroom first. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she gently closed the door. After closing the door, Wei Wei Bai's smile changed. The restlessness of adolescence. System, is the host's brain filled with yellow waste? How could she immediately understand what he meant by washing his underwear in the morning? Can't he pee in his pants? Wei Wei Bai was like a worm in the system. If he pees on the bed, he'll be washing the sheets. System, that makes sense. When Hinanshi saw that the door was closed, his body stiffened for a long time before he came back to his senses. He pursed his lips, took out the underwear that was half washed, and continued to wash it. As he washed, his ears turned red again. It was a burning red that couldn't be cooled down. Beast! He suddenly scolded himself. How could he have such thoughts? He was simply inhumane. After breakfast, Wei Wei Bai took out a stack of bar recruitment slips. Hinanshi saw it and immediately snatched it. What is this? There were all kinds of deceptive words on it, such as free food and lodging, and easy job. Coupled with the naked girl who was clearly sticking to him. Hinanshi was so angry that his eyes turned red. I can't go back to the previous bar, so I plan to find a new job. Wei Wei Bai wasn't impatient at all. Instead, she patiently explained it to him. Hinanshi neatly threw the recruitment slips in his hands into the trash can. You're not allowed to go. Why would you go back to that kind of place? Wei Wei Bai was a little embarrassed. Then I'll find a job as a nanny or a cleaner. Hinanshi said firmly, that's even more unacceptable. These jobs will only lead to bullying. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Nanshi, if we can't do this or that, we won't be able to earn money. Hinanshi didn't think much about it and blurted out, I'll take care of you. After saying that, both of them were stunned. Hinanshi hurriedly tried to salvage what he had said. I mean, although the He family has frozen a lot of funds and is heavily in debt, that's for the company. We still have some private money. You're also a member of the He family, so you can get a share of the assets. They were all his and his brother's private property. He actually had a lot more than his brother because when he was a singer, he had earned a lot of copyright fees. This money wouldn't be under the He family's company name. When the company was in trouble, his money couldn't be frozen. Wei Wei Bai said softly, but this money is all yours and Dongling's. If Dongling wakes up in the future and sees that I spent all his money, what will happen if he can't make a comeback? Hinanshi, why do you have to be so considerate of that cheating brother? This kind of brother who would make others wear a green hat should take away his money and make him cry bitterly. He snorted coldly, his beautiful eyes full of calculation. It's okay. It's just a little living expenses. Aren't you married? This is common property. Wei Wei Bai looked at him hesitantly. But, Hinanshi was almost driven crazy by her gentle temperament. He slammed his hand on the table. No buts. As the daughter-in-law of the He family, is it appropriate for you to go out in public? You should just stay at home and enjoy life. Chapter 583. These words sounded like the old masters of the Qing dynasty. Hinanshi felt that with Wei Wei Bai's soft bun character, someone had to fight for her rights. Otherwise, his brother who liked to make people wear green hats in the future. When he woke up, wouldn't he kick Wei Wei Bai away? They weren't even divorced yet, but he already forced her to drink with him. After the divorce, this soft bun wouldn't be able to get a single cent. He had to take advantage of the fact that his bastard brother wasn't awake to transfer his assets. Hinanshi unknowingly stood on Wei Wei Bai's side. There was no choice, because everyone in the He family was a wolf. They were vicious and ruthless. Wei Wei Bai, a pitiful little lamb, had sneaked in. If he didn't keep an eye on her, she wouldn't even know that she was skinned and stewed. Wei Wei Bai sighed softly, then reached out and held his hand with her slightly cold fingers. There was a hint of gratitude in her eyes. Nanshi, thank you. Hinanshi's fingers stiffened. Her delicate fingertips casually slid across the back of his hand. It gave him a numbing feeling. His breathing was a little messy as he pursed his lips. After a long time, he snorted, "We're family, there's no need to thank me." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 38. Hinanshi was very motivated to liquidate his brother's assets to benefit his sister-in-law. But when he did, the money wasn't right. When he checked again, most of the wealth was taken away by that little B*****''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''"********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* You didn't give your wife money and gave it all to your mistress. You're such a scumbag fighter. But he was already in a vegetative state. Even if he was beaten to death, he wouldn't wake up to repent. Hinanshi held his breath. No, he couldn't let that little B*tch get away with it. He turned back and glanced at Wei Wei Bai, who was washing vegetables and cooking with the nanny in the kitchen. She sat on a low stool, her fingers holding the vegetables as she focused on choosing. Occasionally, she would look up and smile at the nanny. She was gentle and virtuous. He Dongling did not cherish such a good woman. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. By Wei Wei, my posture of washing vegetables looks good, right? Her favorable impression of him increased by a touching amount. The system said, you look good no matter what. Wei Wei Bai. Are you poisoned? The system praised her for being frightening. The system, who was rarely in the mood to praise others, Wei Wei Bai, I think I can cheat now. If I don't do it now, I'm worried that when the score rises to 90, it will all be kinship points. Hinanshi, under her guidance, might have a slightly different image of her. But more than that, he felt pity for his sister-in-law. This level of favorability could be considered familial. The system retorted, can you not be so self-righteous when you say that you cheated? Wei Wei Bai, I was forced to do this. Think about it, Hinanshi's father had a mistress and cheated on his mother. He Dongling had an affair with that mistress and cheated on me and his father. I could only have an affair with Hinanshi and cheated on him so that I wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Was this the Green Hat family? This was an indescribable mess of relationships. The system indicated that its eyes had been contaminated. They were all green and sticky. Hinanshi was still racking his brains on how to kill that little bitch. Wei Wei Bai had already made an appointment with that mistress. The old woman's first wife and the fox spirit mistress were about to start a catfight. After making an appointment, she purposely walked around in front of Hinanshi. She was a little absent-minded and even had a hint of panic on her face. Hinanshi was about to turn into Sherlock Holmes when he checked the accounts. It was the time when his nerves were the most sensitive. His gaze was deep as he stared at her for a while before suddenly saying, "What's wrong with you?" Download. Chapter 584. Wei Wei Bai looked up and forced a smile, "No, I'll be back soon." Hinanshi's expression tensed up, and the light in his eyes turned even colder. This made Wei Wei Bai even more nervous. After a moment of silence, Hinanshi nodded slowly, "Okay, I'll wait for you to come back." Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief, then hurriedly walked out. She even forgot to bring her phone. Hinanshi walked to the sofa and picked it up. The last call wasn't this that shameless little bitch, the mistress? When Wei Wei Bai walked into the coffee shop, the little lover was touching up her makeup. She wore a red low-cut dress, and her long wavy hair made her look extremely seductive. Wei Wei Bai asked, "What's this little lover's name again?" "System, Hu Lijing." Wei Wei Bai, Vixen. Hu Lijing suddenly heard someone calling her, and she raised her head proudly. She saw Wei Wei Bai standing in front of her, wearing a clean t-shirt and long pants. Her hair was tied into a high ponytail, and her face was fair and tender without any makeup. She was so young that she had a clear temperament. Hu Lijing thought for a while before she remembered that this was Wei Wei Bai, the soft bun. Wei Wei Bai didn't let her think too much. After all, the system notified her that Hinanshi was about to come online. She had to end this quickly, so she reached out and grabbed the hot coffee on the table. She splashed it all over Hu Lijing's face. The black coffee and the hot temperature made Hu Lijing jump up and scream. "What are you doing?" "Wei Wei Bai." Wei Wei Bai didn't have time to listen to her nonsense. There wasn't enough time, so he had to save the time. He immediately rolled up his sleeves and slapped her face twice. Hu Lijing had never seen such a swift and decisive first wife. At least talk before hitting someone. Who would start a fight right away? The system said, "He's here." The male lead has entered the cafe. Wei Wei Bai's cold expression changed and she looked at her sadly. "I don't believe that you have an affair with Dongling." Hu Lijing, whose face was covered in blood, was dumbfounded. "Why did you fucking come up and beat me up just because you didn't believe me?" She was also angry. She immediately raised her hand and said angrily, "I don't care if you believe it or not. Your husband loves me. What can I do? When he bought me a car, jewelry, and a house, he called me little darling. If it weren't for me, would he have married you?" After saying that, he was about to slap him. In the end, he was caught by someone from behind. Hu Lijing was shocked. She turned around and saw a tall and thin man wearing a mask and loose casual clothes standing behind her. His eyes were frighteningly dark. Then he looked at Wei Wei Bai. She stood there in a daze, her eyes drooping, her expression blank and pained. It seemed like it would shatter at the slightest touch. Hinanshi didn't know why, but he also felt a sharp pain in his heart. He pursed his lips and didn't know how to comfort her. Hu Lijing narrowed her eyes. She felt that there was an ambiguous relationship between this adulterous couple. She laughed coldly. "What, your husband cheated on you and you found a man to cheat on him?" "Oh right, I heard from Dongling that he married you to hide me. That's why he didn't touch you at all. You might even be a virgin." Wei Wei Bai's body trembled. Her eyes were filled with tears, as if she wanted to refute. But her lips trembled and she couldn't say a word. Hu Lijing was angry after being slapped by her. Seeing Wei Wei Bai's cowardly look, she became angry. He immediately became spirited, and his mouth also became vicious. "Why do you think everyone bullies you?" "It's because Dongling connives." The full articles, the downloads, to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save the. Chapter 585. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said loudly, "You're lying. I don't believe you. He's so gentle to me." Hu Lijing chuckled. "How much is gentleness worth, silly woman? A man who spends money on you is a good man. You think a few sweet words are gentleness? You're too cheap." Wei Wei Bai picked up the coffee on the table and splashed it on her face. Wei Wei Bai then covered her face with her hands. Tears fell from her eyes. "You! How could you do this?" Her words were filled with sorrow. A heart-wrenching sob escaped from his throat. His eyes were filled with despair. She looked up at Hinanshi and turned around awkwardly. Suddenly, she turned around and ran out. Hu Lijing didn't want to be splashed with coffee a second time. However, He Nanshi grabbed her hand tightly and she couldn't run away. He Nanshi took the opportunity to shake her off. His heart was filled with Wei Wei Bai, who had run out. He was worried that she would do something stupid. Hu Lijing shouted angrily, "Why did you run away after hitting someone?" He Nanshi only remembered when she reminded him. Yes, he hadn't hit her yet. He immediately turned around, raised his leg and kicked. He sent Hu Lijing flying with a kick and she crashed into the table. He then put his hands in his pockets and walked out like a violent man. No one dared to stop him. When he walked out, he saw Wei Wei Bai getting into a taxi. The taxi had already left. He immediately stopped another car. Chase after the car in front. The driver was very experienced. "I'm catching adulterers, brother." He Nanshi frowned. "You're the one who's catching adulterers." "That's my sister-in-law." The driver smiled ambiguously. "Sister-in-law, did you get it?" He Nanshi was irritated. He took out a stack of cash. "Are you going to chase after her?" Once the money was taken out, there was nothing that couldn't be chased. With a whoosh, the old driver drove the car out at full speed. For the sake of such a thick stack of $100 bills, he even ran a red light. When he finally caught up with her, he saw Wei Wei Bai get out of the car and stumble into the bar. He Nanshi was also in a hurry to get off the car. The old driver immediately said, "Bro, the fare." He Nanshi narrowed his cold eyes. He pulled out $50 from the thick stack of cash and threw it to him. "The fare." Then, he opened the door and left. The old driver took the $50 and was speechless. When He Nanshi barged into the bar, he was dazzled by the crowd and couldn't find him. His face was dark, and his eyes were sharp as he looked around anxiously. The matter that he had tried so hard to hide had still been discovered. How could his brother, that bastard, ruin his sister-in-law like this? He Nanshi finally pushed through the crowd and saw a familiar petite figure. She was sitting alone at the bar, drinking. The liquor was poured down one cup after another. When he saw He Nanshi, his heart broke. He immediately rushed over and saw that there were still some men who didn't know what was good for them and looked over. It was as if they were waiting for Wei Wei Bai to get drunk so that they could make a move on her. Wei Wei Bai was trying her best to drink. Halfway through, the wine glass was snatched away by someone. She looked up drunkenly and saw He Nanshi wearing a mask. His beautiful eyes were full of ice shards. "Let's go back," he said in a muffled voice. Wei Wei Bai drank the liquor. The strong liquor was so spicy that tears welled up in her eyes. Her face was also red, and there was a kind of beauty that made people fall for her. He Nanshi's throat tightened. He hurriedly lowered his eyes and reached out to grab her sleeve. "My brother is not a good person. My brother should be the one suffering. You didn't do anything wrong. Don't torture yourself." Chapter 586. He wanted to keep this a secret, afraid that she would get a divorce. He was even more afraid that she would be sad. Wei Wei Bai revealed an ugly smile. "I'm fine." He Nanshi was made uncomfortable by her appearance. How could she be fine? She still wanted to endure it alone at a time like this. He repeated again. "Let's go home." Wei Wei Bai turned her face away, looking confused and sad. "I don't have a home, Nanshi." Her family valued boys over girls and did not treat her as a person. Her husband in the He family had an affair and did not treat her as a person either. She really did not have a home. He Nanshi thought of this and his heart was blocked. All the feelings were mixed together and could not escape or be resolved. Wei Wei Bai picked up the glass and wanted to drink again, but his palm pressed down on the glass, making her unable to pick it up. She was stunned and looked up. But she saw that He Nanshi's eyes were clear and bright, with a desperate heat. "Treat me as a family member." Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Family? He held it in for a long time, and could only squeeze out this sentence. You can be my younger brother. I'll be filial to you, and my home is your home. Wei Wei Bai trembled and hugged the system. Tongzi, it's really becoming a family member. Even filial piety has come out. The system said, what a normal male lead. In the previous world, there would be a malevolent male lead at the slightest provocation and a psychopathic male lead. Suddenly, she saw such a cute and normal male lead. She was not used to it. She saw that her expression was downcast, as if she was not interested in what he said. He suppressed all the complicated thoughts in his heart and did not dare to say them. He did not dare to reveal any of those thoughts that blasphemed her. Wei Wei Bai shook her head, her voice was a little muffled. Thank you, Nanshi, but you're not my younger brother. After saying that, she collapsed onto the bar counter and passed out drunk. Nanshi stood stiffly, her words still echoing in his mind. He was not her younger brother. Was she planning to divorce him and disown him as well? Nanshi bent down and picked her up. They left the bar and hailed a cab. Along the way, he hugged her tightly, as if he was worried that someone would snatch her away. Wei Wei Bai lay quietly in his arms. Her soft body was like a cup of water in his hands. The tighter he held it, the more flustered his heart became. Nanshi carried her home. The house was dark and empty. The nanny had gone back long ago, leaving only the two of them here. He didn't think too much about it. He immediately carried her to her room and put her down. He took off his coat and mask and ran to get a towel to wipe Wei Wei Bai's face and hands. Just as he finished wiping, someone suddenly grabbed his hand. Nanshi's fingers froze. He looked over and found Wei Wei Bai staring at him blankly. You're awake, he paused because Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. The tears in her eyes fell drop by drop. She pursed her lips silently and cried in a very suppressed manner. It made one's heart ache when they heard it. Am I a bad person? She muttered to herself. Nanshi frowned and was about to refute. He heard her say faintly, it must be my fault. Otherwise, why would you never touch me? Never touch me, Nanshi remembered what that little B**tch said. His brother had never touched Wei Wei Bai. He thought it was just nonsense. He didn't expect it to be true. Nanshi's mind was in a daze. This was obviously a tragedy, but the emotions that surged in his heart were similar to joy. He clumsily said, you're very good, really. Wei Wei Bai looked at him sideways. Her black eyes lit up. Suddenly, she smiled sweetly with a hint of charm. Chapter 587. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. She felt that Nanshi was much more haggard than her. If she had known, she wouldn't have saved on her makeup and put on 2 panda eyes for herself. Wei Wei Bai forced a smile. Morning, Nanshi. Nanshi looked up at her and immediately looked away. Don't be sad. My brother is not a good person. Don't hurt yourself. Don't go to the bar to drink alone in the future. You have to protect yourself and don't let bad men take advantage of you. Wei Wei Bai's expression became sad. She pulled the corners of her lips and smiled. I'm stupid. I thought that because someone was gentle to me, I thought it was love. Her eyes were confused. I never doubted Dongling. I believed everything he said. Even if he didn't touch me after we got married, I found many reasons for him. Speaking of this, she couldn't help but turn around and touch her eyes. But I never thought that I was just a shield for him. It turns out that I'm just a substitute. Speaking of this, the petite figure finally started to tremble. She was indescribably weak. Nanshi opened his mouth. How was he going to comfort her? His heart ached, but he was afraid that he would say something that crossed the line. He was scared of himself now. His mind was not pure at all. He was afraid that he would not be able to control himself and do something that he would regret. Just like now when she was so weak. His first reaction was not to comfort her. Instead, he wanted to reach out and hug her. Then, his mind was full of sauce. Hinanshi racked his brains, but in the end, he still squeezed out polite words. Don't be sad. Don't be angry and hurt your body. Wei Weibai suddenly turned around and revealed a teary smile. She pretended to be strong and said, I'm fine. It's okay if he doesn't love me. I already knew that a woman like me would not be loved. This sentence was like a blunt knife, cutting Hinanshi until he hissed in pain. He opened his mouth to ask her to divorce him, but swallowed it back. Even if that scumbag brother of his didn't love her, would she still continue to like him? Wei Weibai's face was pale. Her lips trembled as she revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. I will set him free and let him be with the person he loves. Hinanshi's eyelashes trembled. He looked up at Wei Weibai in a daze. Wei Weibai repeated firmly, I want to divorce him. Hinanshi's heart skipped a beat, then dropped again. He couldn't tell if he was upset or happy, but the part of his mind that was clear was aware of it. If she divorced him, he would be able to pursue her. This thought made his nerves finally excited, and his dim eyes brightened. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. With the help of the plant dregs, Wei Weibai finally got rid of her identity as a vain hostess. She immediately took the divorce agreement and planned to go to the hospital to sign it in front of the plant scum. After all, he had to go all the way and wait until the signature. He could kick that scumbag he dangling away with one kick. Hinanshi accompanied her to the hospital worriedly. The whole time, he pursed his lips and his face was dark, but his eyes were shining. When they arrived at the hospital, Wei Weibai saw he dangling in a deep sleep. She realized that, she really couldn't let him off so easily. So Wei Weibai's breath sank into her dantian. Wind blew under her feet, and she looked devastated. She suddenly pounced over and pressed he dangling on top of him. He dangling's eyes widened. I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Wei Weibai saw that she still couldn't press him to death, so she could only settle for the second best. She reached out and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him desperately. Dangling, how can you treat me like this? If you don't love me, then don't treat me well. You treat me well and use me. You make me suffer. He dangling was shaken by the strong wind and felt that his hair was about to be flung out. Was it an earthquake or a tsunami? Wei Weibai only let go when her hands were sore, causing he dangling to fall back onto the pillow. She looked sad and took out the divorce agreement. I'll set you free, dangling. Hinanshi looked at her with pity and heartache. Just as Bai Weiwei was about to sign her name with a pen, a coughing sound was heard. She and Hinanshi looked over at the same time and saw that he dangling had opened his eyes and was clutching his chest as he coughed. The two of them were silent. So, he dangling was awake. The. Chapter 588. He dangling felt like his internal organs were about to explode from being crushed by something. The sharp pain made him wake up immediately. When he woke up, he found that Wei Weibai and Hinanshi were both glaring at him. Their eyes were bright and cold, as if they had a deep hatred for him. He dangling couldn't help but tremble, his pale and haggard face filled with confusion. Weiwei, Nanshi, why are you here? He looked around dizzily. This is a hospital. He, who was in a vegetative state, finally regained his senses. Wei Weibai rehearsed her next performance in her mind. Should she throw the divorce agreement in his face and leave in tears later? Or should she complain about him being heartless before leaving? Without waiting for Wei Weibai to figure it out, the familiar reminder finally sounded again. A prodigal son turning over a new leaf is more precious than gold or silver, you do it. He once abused your heart, liver, lungs, intestines, but in exchange, he never returned. He once hated you, abandoned you, and beat you to death, but you never changed. Your infatuation and love is hard to return. Ah, a prodigal son turning over a new leaf, you're the best. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless, even very calm. Please complete the side mission of the prodigal son turning over a new leaf, make he Dongling cry and fall in love with you, regret that he abused you. Only when the favorability is above 90 can the mission be considered complete. If the mission fails, both the host and the system will belly dance naked on a stage with 10,000 people for 3 hours. Do you accept the side mission? The countdown has passed, accept. Wei Wei Bai and the system's stoic face. After a moment of silence, Wei Wei Bai said, why didn't your heart, liver, lungs, intestines break when you fell, but the side mission reject button? This side mission punishment was getting weirder and weirder. It was simply not something a human could do. The system said, if my heart and liver break, I'll break and won't be able to find you. Wei Wei Bai was melancholy. Damn it, if I knew it was this bad, you should have just broken it, don't find me. Was this transmigration mission something a human could do? He had the heart to risk his life, receive the reward of starving to death, and also had to face the strange punishment. He had never seen a more worried and desolate host than her. The system suddenly started crying softly. You actually despised me. Wei Wei Bai's heart softened. It's just a cheap mouth. You're pretty good. The system stopped crying and waved its little whip as it roared, then why are you still in a daze? Why are you still chatting with me? Hurry up and finish your mission. If you don't want to belly dance naked, then get to work. Wei Wei Bai. Fuck your slag stem. He Nanshi was the first to react. He saw that Wei Wei Bai was staring blankly at He Dongling and did not put down her pen. He knew that her heart was wavering. After all, he was the man she had once loved, Fog. How could he give up so easily when he suddenly woke up? His dark eyes stared at He Dongling. Brother, wake up. He Dongling was a little slow to react. What happened to me? I remember I was driving, and then, Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, you were in a car accident. He Dongling had been lying down for a long time. His mind was a little muddled and his body was a little thin. He turned to look at Wei Wei Bai, his gaze gentle and affectionate. It's Wei Wei. Was I in a car accident? I remember that you were chased out of the house and I was in a hurry to find you. Then the car overturned because I was in too much of a hurry. He Dongling had the handsomeness of a mature man. His pair of eyes had a gentle luster. When he looked at people, even if he was looking at a pig, the pig would think that he had fallen in love with him. Chapter 589. Wei Wei Bai's brain rang. When she met with a scumbag fighter, her scumbag body automatically resisted. Those who looked like scumbags were nothing at all. Only this kind of appearance was graceful and elegant, with a pair of eyes that were filled with electricity. He would attract and flirt with anyone he saw. He was the real scumbag. Wei Wei Bai felt that how could she be at a disadvantage? When she thought of doing a belly dance with the system naked, her emotions were about to explode. Wei Wei Bai restrained her expression and looked at He Dongling in a daze. He Dongling was still using his charm and asked gently, what's wrong, Wei Wei? You were scared. I'm fine. Bai Wei Wei's eyelashes trembled, and a teardrop fell without warning. She hurriedly lowered her head and her thin shoulders couldn't help but tremble. The pen in her hand also trembled. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and looked at the signature on the divorce agreement. It was He Dongling's personal signature. She forced a smile. Dongling, I know everything. He Dongling's smile didn't change. Know what? Wei Wei Bai seemed to be in a sorry state compared to his calmness. I know everything. You. He Dongling's eyes were gentle as he stared at her, as if encouraging her to continue speaking. Bai Wei Wei suddenly sobbed. She bit her lip in embarrassment, and her eyes turned red. It was actually so difficult to say the word cheat. It was just like how his affectionate gaze made her think that she was still loved. Hinanshi stood at the side. Ever since his brother woke up, he had been clenching his jaw and crossing his arms in front of his chest. Then, he leaned against the wall and lowered his eyes as cold as ice. He slowly looked up. In his beautiful eyes, there was only Wei Bai's weak and sorry state. And his brother's seemingly gentle, but in fact, it was a smug threat. Hinanshi's fingers dug into his palm so hard that it was about to bleed. But he didn't feel any pain at all. In his eyes, there was only her fragile figure that had retreated to compromise. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 60. You cheated. This sentence was cold, unyielding, and full of condemnation. Only then did Wei Bai realize that Hinanshi had already walked to her side. He reached out to hold her hand tightly and pressed it down. The tip of the pen then landed on the divorce agreement. Sister-in-law, I saw my brother sign this divorce agreement with my own eyes. He's not good at anything else, but he's been good at lying since he was young. He looks gentle, but he's a beast in human clothing. Don't be fooled by him. Dongling's smile was a little stiff. Was this little brother picked up from the streets? How could he say that about his brother? Wei Bai's fingers were weak. She looked down at the pen and suddenly looked up at Dongling. Her eyes seemed to be filled with tenderness and cold pain, intertwining into a complicated yet impactful look as she looked at Dongling. Dongling's back was numb from the look in her eyes. Her voice was a little hoarse. Dongling, the person you love found me. She said that I'm just a substitute. At this point, Wei Bai suddenly laughed bitterly at herself. No, I'm not even as good as a substitute. I'm just a woman you married to be a target. Because the woman you like is your father's lover. Dongling didn't feel embarrassed at being exposed at all. Instead, he said casually, Wei, how could I do this to you? You know that I'm handsome and rich. There are always people slandering me. Don't believe the words of other women. He was indeed the king of trash fighters. Damn, he even had the face to say such things. Chapter 590. Wei Bai suddenly felt that her skin was not thick enough compared to this person in front of her. She decided that she had to be thicker by another 3 feet. Wei Bai almost couldn't maintain her smile. She looked up at him deeply, as if she was meeting this man for the first time. It was unfamiliar and scrutinizing. It was as if there was a pain that went deep into her bones. This gaze could make one's heart clench. She finally couldn't hold it in anymore and laughed softly. Can you stop lying to me? I can't take it. You know me. No one has loved me since I was young. I lack love. It doesn't matter if you can cheat me of my money or my body, but... Wei Bai gritted her teeth and almost cried out. Don't lie to me about my feelings. I only have this little bit of extravagant hope for love left. You have to dig it out while I'm still alive. Dongling's smile froze. He pursed his lips and suddenly couldn't say the sweet words that he had always casually said. After hurting someone, he had always left as soon as he said so. But this was the first time that someone had laid out such bloody wounds in front of him. She even begged him to stop lying to her. Wei Bai reached out to support her forehead, as if she couldn't bear the burden. Her fingers that were holding the pen moved. Nanshi, let go of your hand. Nanshi stood behind her and didn't move. His fingers were so stiff that he didn't even know how to release them. Wei Bai struggled to break free from his fingers little by little. Then, without anyone's help, she slowly and firmly signed her name on the divorce agreement. When the name was announced, the crowd was stunned. Hinanshi didn't know what happened, but the strength in his body was suddenly drawn out. There was no feeling of joy, only heartache. His heartache for her was overwhelming. Wei Bai picked up the agreement and wiped her eyes with her fingers. Her tone calmed down. Your parents have already escaped abroad, and your little lover is still here. Your family is no longer an obstacle to you. She took the agreement and walked in front of Dongling. His pale face had a firm and calm expression. Wei Wei Bai said, "The only obstacle now is me." After she finished speaking, she revealed a relieved and tired smile. "This is for you. Congratulations, you can finally pursue your true love." After saying that, Wei Wei Bai threw the agreement in his face. Dongling hissed. His face was in pain. Wei Wei Bai looked at him expressionlessly and said, Dongling and Wei Wei Bai have nothing to do with each other from now on." After she finished speaking, she glanced at him indifferently without a trace of the tenderness she had in the past. She had also lost the warmth of joy from seeing him. Then she turned around and left without hesitation. Dongling held the divorce agreement in his hand. His mind was still in a daze as he watched her leave. Was this Wei Wei Bai? She was the one who liked him so much that she could endure any kind of bullying, even if he forced her to drink with him. She didn't want to leave and was only willing to like that idiot. Nanshi, who had already chased after her, suddenly stopped in his tracks. His face was cold and his eyes were dark. He was like an unsheathed knife as he suddenly turned around. He rushed in front of Dongling and raised his long leg. It was a standard taekwondo kick, but he stopped in midair. The shoe was less than 2 centimeters away from Dongling's shocked face. Dongling froze. "Nanshi, what are you doing?" Nanshi pursed his lips. His exquisite face was terrifyingly sharp. "If you hadn't just woken up, I would have kicked you." // Chapter 591. He was afraid that he would kick his scumbag brother into a vegetative state again. He was being merciful because of their brotherhood. Nanshi stopped after he finished speaking and picked up the divorce agreement. "I'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to settle the divorce for you." Since both parties had signed the agreement, the divorce was effective. All that was left was to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to settle the rest of the matters. Nanshi took care of it himself. His eyes were cold. "Brother, from now on, you and sister-in-law have nothing to do with each other." With that, he ignored Dongling's strange expression and chased after her. Wei Wei Bai was gone. Nanshi panicked, worried that she had done something stupid. He put on his mask again and searched for her in the crowded hospital. When he finally reached the entrance of the hospital, he realized that she had already walked out of the hospital. Nanshi immediately ran forward and grabbed her arm. He moved his lips, but the words "sister-in-law" came out of his mouth. Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai froze and turned around in a daze. She was not as calm as before. She looked like she would collapse at any moment. Being betrayed by her own husband and being used as a shield from the beginning was a fatal blow to any woman. When she saw that it was Nanshi, she straightened her back and forced herself to be more alert. "Nanshi, I'm not your sister-in-law anymore. I'll move out of the house." Nanshi said coldly, "Why do you want to move out?" "You don't have to move." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "But," Nanshi interrupted her. "No buts. How can we split the couple's assets? Are you stupid? Half of the house is yours." "Wei Wei Bai, isn't the house a prenuptial asset?" Nanshi was afraid that she would move out and not even want him anymore. He could only desperately find an excuse. "My brother cheated on you. According to the law, he's the one at fault. You're the one who left the family with nothing. Part of his private assets under his name was given to that little bitch, but the majority of his assets that haven't been converted into cash are still there." Wei Wei Bai, so. Nanshi's eyes were full of calculation. He cheated and made mistakes. He's a scumbag, but he didn't do anything wrong with his money. You can't miss a single cent of what you deserve. Wei Wei Bai felt that all her lines had been snatched away. She tried her best to salvage the situation. "I think," Nanshi narrowed his eyes. Yes, I think half of the property is not enough. After all, my brother is the one at fault. You should get more than half of the house. It's only fair that I give you all of it. Wei Bai, does your brother know that you're scheming against him? She looked like she was still going to leave. Nanshi's voice suddenly softened. He lowered his eyes, and the calmness in his eyes shattered, revealing a trace of pleading. So, the house is yours. If my brother comes, you can chase him away. And if you find me an eyesore, you can chase me away. Don't leave. The words "don't leave" were filled with a weak panic. Wei Bai looked at him silently. He was a little nervous, afraid that she would notice something. In the end, she just smiled. Nanshi, you're so good to me. Nanshi felt so sorry for her that he didn't know what to do. Wei Bai suddenly reached out and gently placed her hand on his chest. Can you hug me? Nanshi hesitated for a moment. Without waiting for her reaction, he had already reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. Wei Bai quietly leaned on his chest. She held it in, but in the end, she couldn't hold on anymore. She buried her face in his chest and silently soaked his clothes with her tears. Nanshi's fingers clenched tightly. In the end, he raised his hand and placed it on her back to comfort her. He didn't dare to disturb her, but he was full of strength. His lips moved silently. Don't cry, I'm here. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 65. Chapter 592. After Wei Bai cried, Nanshi led her home. Nanshi tried to brainwash her, this is your home, you don't have to go anywhere. The lawyer has been hired, and he'll give you the property in minutes. You have to take it, or else you'll be an idiot. You've been an idiot once, don't be an idiot a second time. Wei Bai sighed, Nanshi, you're like an angel sent by the heavens to save me. Nanshi smiled, as long as you're happy, I can do anything. Wei Bai thought, this is too easy, his favorability can increase at any time. She asked the system, what's the favorability of that scumbag? The system, 10. Wei Bai said, facing his wife who worked so hard for him, his favorability is so low. He's indeed an extraordinary scumbag. The system, the initial favorability was 5, the remaining 5 points increased when you were crying about the divorce. Wei Bai said, sigh, scumbags always have the same trick. When you don't love him, he'll feel that it's rare. She thought about it, and decided to postpone her flirting with Nanshi. She was worried that if she filled up the favorability, that scumbag's favorability would not increase. She would have to belly dance naked. At that time, no matter how thick-skinned she was, it would be useless. It would be too embarrassing. She could not do it. After Nanshi returned home, he excitedly led Wei Bai to the music room. I composed a few more songs, I'll play them for you. Wei Bai could almost see the titles of the songs floating in front of her eyes. My sister-in-law who's like a loving mother, a mother's love is a mountain, not my real mother is better than my real mother, ah, my love for you is like the yellow river from heaven, Wei Bai thought, no, I don't want to listen, get lost. Nanshi's slender fingers gently opened the lid of the piano. He sat down gracefully. Then he began to play the music he had composed. Each and every song was gentle and affectionate. As Wei Bai listened, she felt as if she had returned to her mother's womb. She really wanted to sleep. The notes under Nanshi's fingers had no lyrics, but they were more vivid than lyrics. It was gentle like water, unlike his previous impactful songs. These songs were more like going through the bustling world of mortals, going through war, and finally turning into the purest love. Playing for only one person. His gaze softened, and he couldn't help but hum a few lines. His voice was sexy and hoarse, but it was clear like spring water that entered one's heart. Wei Bai couldn't help but soften her expression. She began to hum softly. She had the voice of a movie queen. It was sweet but not greasy, It had a unique sense of space and was a perfect match for Hinanshi's voice. The windows of the music room were glass. Sunlight streamed in. She was shrouded in a halo of light, blurring her gentle and beautiful face. Her faint and ethereal singing voice was heard. Hinanshi's fingers paused. He suddenly felt that she was the angel who had been sent to save him from the dark swamp. Wei Wei Bai heard the music stop and couldn't help but smile. It's very nice, Nanshi. Hinanshi lowered his head and said unnaturally, it's because you sing well. He had never thought that his song would come out of her mouth. It was like the sound of nature. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to take his praise to heart. Instead, she looked at him with a gentle gaze. Nanshi, have you ever thought of returning to the stage? Hinanshi was stunned. His fingers landed on the piano keys, making a dong sound. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Actually, I just think that you would be very dazzling on the stage. Chapter 593. Hinanshi's heartbeat sped up. His fingers trembled and he looked up uncertainly. Really? Wei Wei Bai looked at him and nodded lightly. Really, have you forgotten? I'm your fan. When I first liked you, it was because of how you were on stage. When she liked him, Hinanshi's breathing slowed down, but his heartbeat kept getting louder and louder. In the end, he didn't know what to do. He lowered his head, and his ears were red. Then I'll try. He hadn't been online for a long time, and he was afraid that he would see an overwhelming amount of black material. He was also worried that he would see his former fans become anti-fans and scold him. But these negative feelings were crushed when she lightly said, I'm your fan. For the first time, Hinanshi felt that it didn't matter if the whole world scolded him. As long as she was the only one who liked him. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 70. Wei Wei Bai, it was too easy to flirt with. The system also reminded her, this side mission is completed with the completion of the main mission. If the male lead's favorability is 100 and Hidongling's favorability is less than 90, we will have to belly dance naked. Wei Wei Bai. Can you stop reminding me about the belly dance? Just hearing it made her feel ashamed. If she really failed and had to dance, she didn't need to transmigrate. She would just find a thread to hang herself. In the following time, Wei Wei Bai carefully didn't dare to flirt with Hinanshi. Hinanshi was young and didn't have enough willpower. He wasn't as experienced as his slag brother. She just casually tricked him and he impulsively increased his favorability. Hinanshi guarded Wei Wei Bai for a day until she fell asleep. He made sure that she didn't run away before he went back to his room. He laid on the bed for a while, staring at the ceiling in a daze. Finally, he made up his mind. Hinanshi made a phone call to one of the most famous agents in the circle. Hello. I'm Hinanshi. What's the matter? Hinanshi hesitated for a moment. Do you still have the contract that you poached me for? The manager said, you're planning to make a comeback. Have you thought it through? Your family has offended someone. If you make a comeback, you'll face a lot of resistance. Hinanshi, I know you can. The agent, although you're a good seedling and a genius, are you worth the risk? Hinanshi sent over a few of his new songs. The most famous agent in the industry was silent for an hour before calling him again. I've signed you. These songs, are you in a relationship? Hinanshi smiled sweetly. Not really. At most, it's a crush. When he reappeared on the stage and reappeared the glory of the past, dazzling and beautiful. He would bend and humbly beg for her love. He hoped that at that time, she would be willing to hug him. Wei Wei Bai sneezed in the middle of her sleep. Who missed her? Wei Wei Bai rubbed her nose. She had a flash of inspiration. Slagstem, is there any medicine that can paralyze Hidongling? The system, paralysis? Wei Wei Bai, no, paralysis is too hard to serve. Let's make it half paralysis. The system had no choice but to go to the shop. There's a late-night discount. 30 days of paralysis pills, 10 days of life points. Wei Wei Bai felt the pinch for a long time before saying hesitantly, let's buy it. The system clicked to buy it. Are you giving this to He Dongling to take revenge on him? Wei Wei Bai, who would waste their precious life points to take revenge on a scumbag? Do you know what makes a scumbag suffer the most? The download text is at https://www.sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 594. System, what? Bai Weiwei revealed a beautiful smile. Of course it's when he's miserably abandoned by everyone, and finds out that his ex-wife, who he didn't want, is living better than him. He Dongling sneezed in his sleep in the hospital. Why did it feel like someone was cursing him? He woke up the next day and realized that he was paralyzed. He Dongling was silent for a long time and looked between his legs. Paralysis was one thing, but he couldn't not lift it. After confirming that he could lift it, he lay back on the bed tiredly. He listened to the doctor's professional jargon and understood it, but without his legs, he would really be disabled in the future. He picked up the phone and called Hu Lijing. Hello. He Dongling revealed a gentle smile, dear, I'm awake. Hu Lijing hesitated for a moment, Dongling. He Dongling smiled and said, yes. Hu Lijing, I heard that you're paralyzed. He Dongling, who told you that? How did the news spread so quickly? His tone was even gentler, although I'm paralyzed, the important parts aren't. Hu Lijing hesitated and finally said, Dongling, I just found out that the person the He family offended was actually Ninth Master. I can't afford to offend him. He Dongling's smile turned cold, so, you're leaving me. Hu Lijing smiled unnaturally. Why are you saying it in such a scary way? Your eyes are so attractive, but we all know that you like to play with relationships that end peacefully. He Dongling couldn't refute that. He liked a woman every time, but it came and went quickly. As for Hu Lijing, his feelings were still fresh. He hadn't said anything about breaking up, but she said it first. Hu Lijing said, I know that the He family offended someone they shouldn't have, but I didn't know that it was Ninth Master. He's not someone to be trifled with. I'm worried that I'll be implicated, so let's part peacefully. He Dongling's eyes were terrifyingly cold, without any of his usual gentleness. He said softly, fine, I'm tired of playing with you anyway. Hu Lijing laughed out loud. Me too. I'm tired of cheating games. Goodbye then. Thank you for the jewelry and house. Let's meet again. He Dongling hung up the phone. After enduring for a while, he finally couldn't take it anymore and threw the phone in his hand. He had always been the one dumping people, but now, he was being dumped by a woman. No, there was one more. Only then did he remember Wei Wei Bai's divorce agreement. She rejected him as well. But unlike Hu Lijing, her rejection was much more forceful and heartbreaking. He could even see how she tore apart her feelings bit by bit. Destruction was for him to see. He Dongling didn't know why, but he couldn't help but recall the look in her eyes that day. It was full of unwavering determination. He Dongling felt a little uncomfortable. He asked someone to bring him a laptop phone. No, he couldn't bear it. She needed someone to suffer with her. Then, he started to freeze Hu Lijing's bank account. As for the property he gave Hu Lijing, he was sorry. He contacted the person who transferred the property at that time. Yes, he got it back. The most expensive jewelry he gave Hu Lijing was paid in installments. He wasn't paying anymore. Goodbye. As for the bags and clothes he bought, he would just give them to her as an overnight fee. He Dongling always had a backup plan. He had been terrifyingly rational since he was young. His parents' feelings for his younger brother couldn't affect him. When he grew up, with a pair of affectionate eyes and a good family background, he had always been successful. Loving someone didn't last long. Chapter 595. Liking something for less than 3 months. He did not care how miserable others were, he only cared about his own happiness. After he woke up, he realized that the He family had offended someone they should not have offended and was forced to such a state. Although he still had some money on hand, he would have to spend it sparingly in the future. He had to take back what he had given away. Oh right, when Wei Wei Bai got divorced, did she get any assets? Giving her a few $100,000 should be enough for this poor woman to be happy. He Dongling thought coldly. Then he tried to move his leg, but he could not feel anything. Damn, was he really crippled? Wei Wei Bai sent an anonymous message to Hu Lijing. As expected, when Hu Lijing found out that the He family had offended Sire Jiu, she was so scared that she immediately ran away. In fact, when Wei Wei Bai saw the information, she was so scared that she wanted to run away too. Because this Sire Jiu, an old man in his 60s, had great power and all kinds of magical experiences. Although the He family was powerful, they were not enough in front of him. He was completely crushed. He was the invisible boss of this world. And because this big brother was in a high position, he was thinking about hobbies in his old age every day. In his old age, he liked to raise flowers, birds, and so on. He liked to torture people. And he liked to torture handsome men and beautiful women. It was as if he felt that he was old and ugly, so he did not like young and beautiful people. He could not pass the time without torturing them. It was common to see people being crushed. Casually hanging, beating, and pouring cement on people were all trivial matters. What Qing dynasty's 10 great tortures, he would give people one from time to time. Or he would use a fire rod, or roast human flesh or something. Wei Wei Bai finished reading the information. Is this the ancient times, or the primitive era? Is this not the modern era? A society ruled by law. The system said, the Qing dynasty's 10 great tortures and fire roasting human flesh are all rumors, but he liked to torture people. The emptiness and loneliness in his old age are real, pouring cement is also a big fun for him. Wei Wei Bai felt that with this master, no matter how strong the love was, it would be destroyed. So she silently sent a message to Hu Lijing. Sure enough, He Dongling broke up with Hu Lijing. Wei Wei Bai felt that it wasn't worth it for the original owner. He Dongling, this guy, wouldn't be moved at all. Even if he had to take a huge risk and marry her as a cover. He Dongling was just being impulsive. Whether it was his love or Hu Lijing's love, it was only temporary. The original owner, an innocent person, was tormented. After dealing with Hu Lijing, Wei Wei Bai started to call for a nurse. Look for nannies who have abused their masters. The crueler the better. She wanted He Dongling to feel the warmth of love. She had to let him know what the harsh reality was. When He Nanshi woke up, he received a call from his agent. I started to help you clear your name. I've already talked to 9th Master. The Internet Water Army won't do anything to you anymore. I'll help you take over your Weibo and QQ. Prepare to make a comeback. He Nanshi nodded solemnly. Thank you. Agent, you're welcome. We each take what we need. My company doesn't have any good seedlings to replace me recently. You can come at the right time to cheer up the weak singing circle. He Nanshi told him a bunch of plans for the future. When he was done, he finally heaved a sigh of relief and hung up the phone. Things went smoother than expected. He bet that the He family had already collapsed. 9th Master's anger towards his parents for offending him had subsided after he punished them. And the power behind this agent was especially powerful. He could get in touch with 9th Master and help him plead for mercy. But in the future, he wouldn't be as free as he was now. After signing with this company and following this agent who only looked at value, busyness became the main theme of his life. But for her, it was all worth it. Chapter 596. Hinanshi walked out. As he had not slept the entire night, his complexion was not good, but his eyes were very bright. Wei Wei Bai was putting on her shoes and getting ready to go out. Hinanshi quickly walked over. Wei Wei, where are you going? Wei Wei Bai corrected him. Call me sister, I'm older than you. Hinanshi muttered, just a year and a half older, that's not that much older. If Wei Wei Bai did not speak in such an old-fashioned manner, she would look so delicate. Standing next to him, she was simply youthful and beautiful. Compared to his brother, who was a sly old fox, they were a much better match. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm going to look for a job. Hinanshi became nervous. What job are you looking for? You're not allowed to go to the bar anymore. Wei Wei Bai smiled. I won't go, but I can't always stay at home. Look at how much weight I've put on. If I let you take care of me, I'll become a pig. Hinanshi was a little hesitant, his beautiful eyes fixed on her. He blinked, then lowered his head and said softly, I'm going to start afresh. Wei Wei Bai, ? Seeing that she did not understand, Hinanshi pursed his thin lips and said again, I'll stand on the stage again. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up, revealing a surprised smile. Really? Nanshi. But soon, she showed a worried expression. But, those people on the internet, Hinanshi immediately said, those words come and go quickly. I'll clear my name soon. Even if people slander me, I'm not afraid. Who hasn't gone through storms to become a superstar? Wei Wei Bai looked at him with relief, her smile gentle. You've grown up, Nanshi. Hinanshi, why do I feel like I'm my mother? Wei Wei Bai's smile became even more benevolent. Don't let your favorability increase so easily. I don't want to dance naked. Hinanshi suddenly stretched out his hands and placed them on Wei Wei Bai's thin shoulders. Then, he lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. Wei Wei Bai was caught off guard for a moment and was stunned. Hinanshi felt that she finally didn't have a motherly smile like this. Feeling a little better, he said, this is the kiss of blessing that I will strive for. You are my sister. My glory is all yours. These words sounded awkward. However, Hinanshi did not dare to openly express his love. After all, with his big brother as an obstacle, she would definitely not agree to his request. Even though they were divorced, the He family had already hurt her. Only when he returned to the stage and stood in his former position would he change his words. Hinanshi saw the doubt in her eyes and smiled. So, as the future superstar sister, you don't need to work. He had been laying the groundwork for so long just so that she would not go out to work. Wei Wei Bai was obviously relieved. It's okay. I actually found a job as a caregiver. I won't go back to the bar. I'm used to being busy. It's uncomfortable to stay at home all day with nothing to do. Hinanshi thought about it and could only reluctantly nod. If you're tired, you can stop. You have money. You don't need to work. He was the one who opened her account. The money in it was all from his brother. He had also selfishly deposited more than half of his own money. Wei Wei Bai's smile deepened. She said gently, lower your head. Hinanshi was very obedient and lowered his head without thinking much. She had already tiptoed and raised her head to kiss his forehead. The strands of hair on his forehead gently slid past her lips. Hinanshi did not dare to move. Her soft lips had a faint fragrance. At the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 597. He longed to keep this petal-like kiss for more time. Wei Wei Bai left him and said with a smile, this is a blessing kiss from Big Sister. You will definitely be able to return to the stage, Nanshi. Hinanshi's ears turned red and his cheeks also turned red. He looked away and put his hands in his pockets. With great difficulty, he snorted, I will. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. Wei bai, why do I have to flirt? Why can't I control my flirting actions? I really want to chop off my hands. After Hinanshi left, Wei bai's face darkened. No, I have to quickly put that scum on the agenda. How is he doing? The system also had a common enemy. Yes, we have to quickly raise that scum's favorability. Dancing around naked, it was enough for the host to do it, but she had to drag it in. The system dutifully reported the situation on He Dongling's side. He Dongling's money was taken away by Hinanshi. Hu Lijing's little lover knew that he was paralyzed and had offended Jiu Yi, so she also waved goodbye. The new caregiver was a psychopath who liked to abuse the rich people who hired him the most. But he was careful in the beginning and didn't reveal any clues. But He Dongling was dissatisfied with the male caregiver, so he turned around and contacted the housekeeping center, planning to hire a new caregiver. Now He Dongling was in a state of uncertainty, at the bottom of his life, and doubting himself. Wei bai thought for a while before calling the housekeeping center. She planned to use the housekeeping center to let herself replace the caregiver, planning to give that scum the love of his ex-wife. She wore long sleeves and shorts, with her ponytail tied into a bun, and no makeup on her face. Then she looked in the mirror and did some eye exercises. When she opened her eyes were bright, with a trace of vitality that had long disappeared from this body. Even as a caregiver, she could see a strong and beautiful appearance full of hope for the future. And He Dongling. He was a remarried old man who was at the end of his rope, paralyzed, and unwanted. Wei bai expressed that if it wasn't for the sake of the favorable impression mission, she really wanted to kick him up into the sky to prevent him from polluting Earth. When he went to the hospital to replace the male caregiver, the system suddenly said, that perverted male caregiver seems to know that he's about to be replaced. He's about to take action. Wei bai said, let's go quickly, or He Dongling will be tortured to death. He Dongling was in a very bad mood. With a gloomy expression, he said to the nurse, push me out. The male caregiver smiled amiably. Yes, sir. Then he pushed the wheelchair and walked out. The sun shone brightly, but for He Dongling, whose legs were crippled, everything was meaningless. The He family had been suppressed to such an extent that they had offended Ninth Master. Even if the He family had the connections and power to make a comeback, they didn't dare to make a move. Because Master Jiu didn't say anything, if his parents dared to come back from abroad. Then, Master Nine would directly drown his parents in cement and drown them in the sea. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have instigated his father to snatch resources from Master Jiu. He thought that the He family already had the power to fight that perverted old man. He didn't expect that the old man's real strength was so powerful that the He family couldn't compete with him at all. He Dongling stared fiercely at his legs. How did they become crippled? He was now a cripple. It was easier said than done for him to start afresh. Suddenly, He Dongling looked up. Why was the wheelchair getting more and more remote? He frowned and didn't think much for a moment. Let's go back, I'm tired. Chapter 598. But the caregiver continued to push him forward as if he didn't hear anything. He Dongling's heart tightened, but he said calmly, let's go back. The caregiver finally pushed him to a place where there was no one else. His face became ferocious. Do you know? Why did I become a caregiver? He Dongling felt that something was wrong. He turned around and was flipped over. The caregiver overturned the wheelchair and stepped on He Dongling's calf with one foot. He Dongling didn't feel any pain because his lower limbs were paralyzed. Even if he felt pain, it wouldn't reach his brain. But he still instinctively flinched. The caregiver saw him struggling on the ground. He laughed sinisterly. I was bullied when I was poor. When my mother died, I couldn't even afford the surgery fee of 10,000 yuan. But what about you? You're staying in a VIP ward with a bunch of doctors and nurses waiting on you. Why? He dongling, so what if you're rich? What does it matter to me if you're poor? Of course, he calmed down quickly and was careful not to provoke this caregiver who was obviously mentally ill. Actually, I don't have much money left. I'm bankrupt and will be kicked out of the hospital soon. He analyzed this caregiver in a second. He hated the rich. The caregiver kicked him in the stomach. He dongling felt that his internal organs were about to shift. His face turned pale and he coughed desperately. The caregiver roared, "Do you think I'm stupid? I heard you calling to change caregivers. Do you think you can afford to change caregivers but not stay in the hospital? This society is so ugly because of the existence of scum like you. I came here to kill you all." He dongling felt that he was unlucky. Not only would he get into a car accident and become disabled, but he would also meet perverts after becoming disabled. The perverted caregiver dug out a handful of soil and was about to stuff it into He dongling's mouth. "Aren't you very rich? You've never eaten soil before, right? I'll let you have a taste." He dongling finally couldn't take it anymore. He shook his head desperately and the soil was pressed on his face. Although he didn't get to eat it, he felt extremely humiliated. The caregiver saw his face covered in dirt and laughed out loud. In the past, those who were paralyzed in bed couldn't speak, so they couldn't expose me. This is the first time I've done anything to a rich person like you. He dongling's face paled. "What are you doing?" The caregiver dragged him. "There's a small slope in front of us. If I throw you down, there will be big rocks below. I think you'll hit your head when you go down." He dongling grabbed the ground with all his might. "Let me go. I'll give you money. I still have a lot of money. I'll give you as much as you want." The caregiver said, "So what if you're rich?" "What I want is dignity." He dongling hurriedly said, "If you want dignity, I can give you money. If I give you a lot of money, no one will look down on you." The caregiver roared angrily, "Trash like you don't understand at all. Some things can't be bought with money. Family, love, and friendship can't be bought with money." He dongling, meeting a pervert, "I don't feel good." The caregiver dragged him to the slope. "After you go down, I think your whole body will be paralyzed. I'll use a rock to stab you in the head. You can only lie on the bed obediently and let me serve you." He dongling struggled until his eyes were red. His fingers dug into the ground so hard that his skin was bleeding. He was frightened and angry. "You better let go of me. Otherwise, when I get out, I'll make you suffer." Chapter 599. The caregiver sneered. "My lowly life can be exchanged for your life. It's worth it." After saying that, he was about to push him down. The caregiver had just used his strength when his body suddenly shook. A rock had hit him on the head. He dongling was on the verge of despair, but the strength that was pulling him was gone. He suddenly looked up. A pair of thin, straight, and fair calves appeared in his bloodshot eyes. Then that pair of legs squatted down. A familiar yet unfamiliar face appeared. Her eyes seemed to be filled with sunlight, and there was a kind of vitality in them. "He dongling, are you okay?" He dongling's desperate heart relaxed. Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the caregiver who had been knocked out by her and frowned. "If I hadn't happened to pass by, you would have died." After saying that, she didn't care about He dongling's sorry state. She reached under his armpits and dragged him to the wheelchair. After putting him in the wheelchair with difficulty, she quickly pushed him and said, "I already called the police, but when I saw that you were about to be pushed down, I could only knock him out with a rock." He dongling's lips moved. He felt that Wei Wei Bai's state was unexpected. After losing him and divorcing him, shouldn't she be dispirited and haggard? Why did she look so lively and full of life, like a fresh and tender grass that had just sprouted? He struggled to open his mouth and finally said, "I thought you couldn't wait for me to die." Wei Wei Bai paused in her steps. After a moment of silence, she said, "Am I such a bad person in your eyes?" He Dongling was choked by her words. Wei Wei Bai laughed. "That's true. I'm poor and have a lowly job. It's only right that you play with me. I actually hoped that you would understand me." He Dongling had just experienced a life and death situation. He couldn't say a single word of the coaxing lies in his mind. He frowned. His face was covered in dirt, and he didn't have the slightest bit of his usual carefree and dignified appearance. "I didn't think of you that way. Besides, you used to be very pretty. You weren't that unbearable." Wei Wei Bai's smile twitched. "Are you saying that I'm not pretty now?" It was rare for He Dongling to be embarrassed. He was actually blocked by her words. He felt that his mind was in a mess. His fingers gripped the armrest of the wheelchair. "You're much better than before." She didn't put on makeup, nor did she look at him with adoration. However, she was much more dazzling, as if even her temperament had changed. It brought him a lot of novelty. Wei Wei Bai calmly said, "Because the beautiful one from before is dead, and I'm the only one left." He Dongling was pricked by her words and felt a slight pain. This was the first time a woman had told him this in person. He did something wrong to her, and she died once. In the past, he would leave after he was done. Wei Wei Bai was also having an affair with Hu Lijing at that time. He just happened to need a wife to deal with his family. In addition, she might have a rebellious heart and love to play, so he married her. However, after marrying her, he felt that she wasn't presentable. Also, he felt that she was a little dirty in various aspects of her career. He couldn't be bothered to touch her. He was indeed a scumbag, but he was a scumbag with a clear conscience and no burden at all. However, Wei Wei Bai was the first woman to make him feel a psychological burden. Wei Wei Bai pushed He Dongling to the hospital for a checkup. The police also came and arrested that perverted caregiver. Wei Wei Bai waited until He Dongling came out of the checkup and said to him, "Since you're fine, I'll be leaving." Chapter 600. He Dongling glanced at the tag on her clothes. "You're a nurse." Wei Wei Bai glanced at the tag on her chest nonchalantly. "Because I'm not a hostess anymore, I'm a nurse. With my education, I can't find a good job." These words were really blunt. Each sentence was meant to stab him. He Dongling curled his lips. "Don't tell me you're my nurse." Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm. "Yes, I didn't know that I was going to be your nurse, and I didn't know that there was something wrong with your leg." He Dongling clenched his fingers and tightened them. His leg was paralyzed. He would be a cripple in the future. He glanced at the youthful and bright Wei Wei Bai and suddenly felt that it was a little dazzling. Even if she was a nurse, he was a cripple who needed someone to serve him. In front of her, he wasn't much stronger. He Dongling smiled. "After the divorce, you can still get some money. I can give it to you, so you don't have to be a nurse anymore." Wei Wei Bai also smiled. "You're so generous." He Dongling, why does it feel like sarcasm? Wei Wei Bai said again, "Nanshi said that you've already given me a large sum of money and asked me to keep it. I didn't expect you to continue giving me money." He Dongling was dumbfounded. When did he give her money? He Dongling's face darkened. "Wait for me." Then he pushed his wheelchair to find his laptop, opened his account, and looked for his property list. He made a few more phone calls. He found that Nanshi's cheap brother had actually transferred more than half of his money. And on the grounds of divorce, he had transferred it to Wei Wei Bai. The law even supported it because it was a joint property of the couple. Even the name of the house had been changed because he was the wrong party. The lawyer and Nanshi were simply vampires. They had taken all his money and given it to Wei Wei Bai. He Dongling couldn't hold his smile any longer, even though he could earn money. But giving away so much at once made his heart ache. Wei Wei Bai and the system were checking the affinity. Only 25. The system also shook its head. What a scum. Saving his life increased his favorability by 15 points. Wei Wei Bai frowned. It seems that we can only pray that Hinanshi's favorability doesn't increase too quickly. This side target isn't easy to deal with. Scumbags usually had a hard heart. In addition, he was vigilant and had a rich experience in relationships. It was not easy to trick him. The system said, favorability has decreased. Only 20 left. Wei Wei Bai wanted to turn back time and let that perverted nurse paralyze Hinanshi. Trash dog, what's the point of saving you? When He Dongling came back, his face was dark. Wei Wei Bai's expression didn't look good when she saw her favorability drop. When the two of them saw each other, they smiled politely. It was indescribably creepy. The system trembled. He Dongling rubbed his fingers and said casually, I think it's good for you to stay and take care of me. After all, we used to be husband and wife. After all, they were husband and wife. He knew that Wei Wei Bai wasn't a pervert. She wouldn't abuse him. He Dongling now had a psychological shadow when he saw a nurse. When he saw Wei Wei Bai, who saved him, he always felt that she was an angel. If she didn't take so much of his money, she would be even more angelic. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. How much did you give me? He Dongling's smile froze. Talking about money hurts feelings. Wei Wei Bai, if you don't have money, why are you talking to me about feelings? He Dongling's smile gradually disappeared. Wait, where did that white fool who didn't take a single cent from him and was moved by his words go? Slash. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.